Continuing the LTO discussion, John Teal is now joined with Bruce Master. John?
Great. Bruce was our marketing rep. I'll let him introduce himself in a minute. I wanted to just quickly capture something that didn't come out in the business discussion that turned out to be of great interest. I mentioned that licensees paid for a package, and I mentioned royalties, and you might wonder,
Nice job, thank you.
what is the basis of the royalty? And it is not an enumeration of patents that were owned by the three mother companies that we were allowing a licensee, whether it's a drive maker or a media maker, access to. We didn't enumerate it. We simply said, we don't know what we're giving you, but if we own it, you can have it for the price of the license and the royalty. Unfortunately, in the beginning, the three companies didn't own everything we were going to need, and I'll give you a funny anecdote. There's a company out there, I forget their name, maybe somebody will remember them. They have a patent on one bit that says the following information has been compressed. Anybody remember the name of that company? Little podunk company, Stack. So, that wasn't our IP, yet we wanted compression in the specification, and Stack brought it to our attention that we were potentially using their IP. Actually, I don't think Stack did. I think we kind of realized it ourselves and said, well, how do we go get the rights to the Stack IP, their lousy little pesky one-bit patent, without kind of waking them up on how big this could become someday. And beyond that, it goes into a black hole. It gets cloak and dagger. But the way we tended to handle one-offs regarding confidential information or other people's IP was one company would get assigned to go fix it. And we typically sent the guy with the shortest pockets. So it tended to be Seagate, representing Seagate, wanting access to the IP because then LTO could use it. At some point, though, we did pay off Stack. They didn't know then what they probably know now, how big this was going to be. I think there were a couple of other examples, I don't remember them, but I wanted to complete the discussion around confidential information, how it was handled, rights, because this was all above board. We were absolutely paranoid about not breaking the law, was my point. Okay, and we can talk more later in the Q&A if that's of interest. Because there's a whole backstory on how the royalties got divided, and I won't go there right now. Introducing Bruce Master, he was longtime marketing team lead from IBM to the Consortia. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Bruce.
Okay, thank you, John. I started with IBM back in 1977. I'm retired now after 35 and a half years, and I started in sales. I'm a graduate of Arizona State University in business advertising, and started, well, before IBM, I was a manager of some Gap stores in the Phoenix area. And at that time, IBM was hiring pretty much anyone that could present themselves well, had a business attitude, but could also complete successfully the aptitude test that they would give you. So I had business background, of course, with my education. I managed some very high-end, I should say high-volume retail stores, and fortunately passed that aptitude test. Unlike some, it took me a great number of interviews to get through IBM and get hired. And I was working at, that time was called Goldwater's, a retail store in Phoenix, managing a department there. And got the call on, I think it was about December 15th of that year, that we're going to hire you and you'll start on December 31st, which the way IBM handled their vacation plan was really good because I immediately got 2 years vacation that first year. So that was nice. But ended my job right then.
2 weeks because of the 31st.
Because of the 31st, right. Exactly. And I started in sales. unlike Brad, who spoke before me in the data processing division, I was in the general systems division, which was small to medium-sized computers. Pardon me. And the first year is a training year, and you spend about back then you would spend about 4 months total, off and on, in Atlanta, Georgia, getting trained on all kinds of concepts, business concepts for accounts receivable, billings, sales analysis, etc., as well as computer concepts. And then at about 3/4 of the way through that year, you make a decision to go into the sales area or into the systems engineering area, and I went sales. And started then the following year, of course, on quota and selling computers, and did that for several years. And in Tucson, and I was assigned to Tucson. I moved from Phoenix to Tucson. Spent my whole career after that in Tucson. And in Tucson, we had the development lab. At that time, it was development and manufacturing lab. And I had an opportunity, even though I was in sales, I've been talking to some folks that I knew at the site, to go to that site and get some experience in plant life, if you will. So I went, after about 3 years in sales, went to the manufacturing development site and started in recruiting. And went from recruiting to education to community relations. And I'll go back to recruiting, though, when I first got there. And I remember the group saying when I was there that they were doing a lot of hiring, and it was very, very busy. And we were expanding from about 5,000 employees to about just over 6,000 employees. And they were saying, "Why did you come here? We are so busy." I actually found it pretty easy and pretty straightforward, because I was the kind of busyness, pressure, and activities that you do in sales, to me, was much more challenging and much more rigorous than the kind of activities that they were seeing in recruiting at the time. So I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the recruiting, enjoyed the education, community relations. It was really a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. After probably, I think that was maybe 5 years I was there at that plant site, I decided, excuse me, in my career, I wanted to add a technical aspect, technical experience to my career, and went and interviewed back in the sales field for a systems engineering job with the branch manager. He really wanted me to become a sales rep again, so we made a deal. He said, "All right, I'll let you be a systems engineer if you come back in sales for the remainder of this year," which was about 4 months. "I'm going to give you a 6 months quota. You have 4 months to work this territory and be the sales rep. And at the end of that time, then you can decide if you want to stay in sales or go into systems engineering." And I made the 6 month quota in 4 months. And at the end of it, even though I had made some pretty good money in commissions and sales, I really wanted to add that technical aspect to my resume. So I went into systems engineering. And I found I was actually being in a systems engineering / sales mode, because I made a lot of the presentations and as well as installing systems throughout that territory, and I did that for about 5 years. At the end of that, an opportunity came up again back in the marketing environment, or back in the plant environment, I should say, for a marketing position. They decided in the actual manufacturing development lab, they needed to do some of their own marketing from that facility. So I called up somebody that I knew. Remember Bill Calandrella back then? Called up Bill Calandrella and said, "Hey, I heard about this new product you've got. It's a 3494 tape library." He goes, "Yeah, we're just getting ready to release that." This was in 93, I think, late 93. And he said, "We actually do have a position we're going to need to do some marketing." This was a Friday. He said, "Why don't you come in on Monday and you'll interview with a fellow named Herb Day." Probably remember Herb pretty well.
Oh, yeah.
So I went and I interviewed with Herb Day, and I knew nothing about a 3494 tape library. So that weekend I went on the web and learned a little bit more about it.
We had the web in 93, a little bit of
We had a little bit of web then. And I put together a presentation on the 3494 and how to market it. And so Herb told me about, he was drawing things on a chalkboard and what he envisioned that they really wanted to do, some of the goals they had for this big tape library. And then I turned around and showed him my laptop and I said, here's some ideas I have. I think they coincide with you and some additional things we went through. And he goes, this is really good. I really like this. I go, will you hire me? I guess he never had somebody be so bold, but he, I think, remembered that I was coming from a sales environment, so I was going for the throat and trying to close the deal. And he said, yes, I will. And I go, by the way, I need 2 weeks off to go get married. He says, okay, you got it. We kind of closed the deal right then. It was really a lot of fun, that interview. And Herb Day, I thought, was a great manager. I really enjoyed working for Herb because he skipped all of the ceremony. He was not politically correct, and he really told you if you were doing well or not doing well, and he didn't mince words, which I really liked. And it was really a lot of fun marketing the 3494 back then, getting it off the ground. So I was in marketing for about, at that time, with Herb for several years, and I think probably the whole marketing part of my career was the last 15 years of my career. The last
real quick,
with IBM.
Bruce.
Yeah.
Was the 3494 the big yellow robot, or was that our first real library? I don't remember.
No, the 3494 was the smaller version.
first
that
real.
grew to like 16 frames.
Okay.
Yeah. And the last 11 years of those 15 was with the LTO Consortium. So I entered the LTO Consortium in just around generation 2 of the LTO products.
Playing the roadmap.
Yep.
We say
In the
say
roadmap.
products.
Oh yeah, in the roadmap.
Specification.
And then I retired from IBM. I'll get back to that in a moment, the whole LTO Consortium part of my career in marketing with the LTO Consortium. And about 2.5 years ago, I retired from IBM. And since retiring, I actually still am active in probably 3 roles. One does not have anything to do with technology or storage, but 2 do. So one of those roles is I teach golf. And the reason I got into that, I've been playing golf for a couple decades, but IBM, when in the plan that I'm on and many of us are on, when you leave, they give you a little bucket of money that says, would you like to go get retrained in a new career? So I immediately called up the Redemption Center and said, hey, can I go on a golf vacation and use some of this money for a golf vacation? They said, no, but what you can do, what some have done is, you can go get trained, certified to be a golf instructor. I go, really? That sounds like fun. So I did some more research on the web, flew off to Chicago about 1 week later, and got certified as a United States Golf Teachers Federation golf instructor. Came back and I've been teaching a lot of golf since. I've had about 50 students and run about 20 clinics. 2 other things though that I am doing that just sort of came my way, which I'm really having a lot of fun with. One is working some business shows still for the LTO Consortium, 1 or 2 a year, managing an LTO Consortia booth at these business shows. And the other one is writing the blog for the LTO Consortium at the LTO website. So I've written now about 14 blogs, and it's really been a lot of fun on various subjects, but they all really revolve around storage and being efficient with storage, and of course it has a large element of LTO technology involved with it.
Not to be too nosy, but do you get compensated for any?
I do get compensated. I'm actually hired by
Good for you.
Thank you.
Kind of like Carl Bruckner type of an arrangement or something.
The business shows are actually managed by a third-party company, which John mentioned early on, that there are various third parties that help the consortium get done what they need to get done, whether it's through the marketing team or the business team, etc.
Are you getting paid to advertise Ultrium right now?
I am not paid to do advertising at all.
right now?
I'm focusing on your shirt there.
Oh no, but I do have a lot of these golf shirts or polo
It's called
shirts.
a free shirt, I
Yeah.
think is what it's called.
The team, and I'll talk more about the actual activities of the marketing, but one of the things that they do is go to business shows and have a booth, which I mentioned, where they can demonstrate the products and talk about the technology. And they like to dress alike as a team so people can recognize who are the representatives that are here that I can ask questions to, so they all wear the same shirts, and this is one of those when I used to be on the team.
And
As
Ultrium
opposed
is
to a company identity.
Right, it's not a company thing, it's an LTO consortium thing.
yeah, and Ultrium is related to LTO as
Oh, John explained a little earlier, but I'll elaborate a little bit. There originally were two formats of the linear tape open technology. One of those formats was Excellus, that never made it through fruition to become a product from companies, but it was a specification. Second specification was Ultrium, which you can see on this shirt. Ultrium LTO.
I did a zoom in on the shirt when
Okay.
I asked the
Great.
question. So
And
it was-
Ultrium is the format of the cartridge. So it's the shape of the cartridge, that it's a single spool, how the data is written to the cartridge, etc. So that's this particular cartridge here.
So that
Children?
is an Ultrium, and that is
This is
what
Ultrium.
an Excellus would have looked like.
Yeah, it would have looked very similar to this Excellus, but that one didn't make it to market because customer demand kept demanding this particular high capacity cartridge.
Children?
Pardon me?
You have children?
I do. I have one son, U of A grad at the Eller College of Business, and he's 27 and a half, and great guy. He's got his own home now and a great job, so he's doing really well. Very happy about
Did
that.
you
I'm
make-
proud of him.
Did you make the 100% club as a salesman?
I did. Had a couple 100% clubs, a couple of, back then they had what was called the Systems Engineering Symposium, so I had a couple of those.
Okay.
So the sales part of my career was really a lot of fun. Systems engineering was quite an experience. I really enjoyed that too.
And any fun stories from 100% club, keeping it short?
I don't know if this is really a funny story. I would use the word fun, but it is I thought back then when you went to the 100% club, there was usually not only a lot of fun with all of your peers in the industry then, or in the field of selling, but they would have some really great entertainment. So one of those experiences was Kenny Rogers, and it was in the round, a theater in the round. So every seat was really a good seat, and he really put on a show. I wasn't a huge Kenny Rogers fan at then, but I am now, and he really put on a great show and talked a lot to the audience and had tailored jokes that dealt with sales and IBM, and it was really a lot of fun back then.
Is it true that systems engineers really ought to be compensated because they sell more than the salesman, having been on both sides?
Well, have seen both sides. Sales, the pressure is really on you in the sales environment to, you make a sale and you ring the bell. And back then they actually did have a bell in the bullpen. You probably remember that, Brad. And it was a lot of fun. The next day it's, okay, what'd you do for me today? Well, let me see your plans. Who's the next person you're going to try to close to sell some product to? Systems engineering, there was the pressure of actually meeting deadlines to get products installed and make sure that they're installed properly. The customer's really happy. They trusted you a lot in systems engineering, whether you were a field engineer actually repairing products or in systems engineering actually installing and making them work. So because they trusted you so much, they would ask you a lot of questions that were really more sales-oriented questions, but they wanted to hear it from you about, will this product do that, or et cetera. So you find yourself doing some salesy type things in systems engineering because of that. And I enjoyed that too. That was a lot of fun. Customers were great and really fun to work with.
Okay.
So that brings us up to date as far as what I'm doing in my retirement, and writing this blog has really been a lot of fun. I wasn't sure I wanted to do it. There was a bid that came out from the Consortium looking for someone to write their blog for them.
Is this LTO.org?
LTO.org.
Same website?
Yep, same website. It's actually called Blog Bites. If you go to the .org, click on News, and drop down, it'll show you one of the links there is Blog Bites. But, excuse me. I wasn't sure I really wanted to do it at first, because I thought, do I really want to put my head back in that world again? Because my head right now is in the golf world. And but I thought, it does sound challenging. My wife strongly encouraged me. She goes, do you realize that this is the kind of job you can do from anywhere? All you need is a connection to the internet and to a word processor, and just start keying away. And it has worked out that way. I found myself sitting in a Starbucks, and I'll be typing away, working on the same blog, editing it, looking at it, and then I might go on a vacation up to Sedona, and I'll be sitting in the room, get up early, and I'll start working on that blog again. So it's really been a lot of fun to do that.
Are you making minimum wage as an hourly rate when you put all that time in?
It's more like by the blog, by the actual blog. That's how I did it.
So turning back now into LTO, I think John has a number of provocative things he'd like to discuss with you.
Sure. Would you, John, just to kind of, I think what you're going to probably lead me to is what was the actual marketing team goals and assignments, if that's
Sure,
something that you want me
sure.
to delve
And-
into,
and
I'll hop
just-
into them.
You did a large variety of activities, and just
We did.
kind of a broad brush, what types of things. I mean, there was publishing stuff, there was web
Sure.
stuff, there was the business shows,
Exactly.
all the goodies, golf balls, T-shirts,
That's right. There were a
golf
lot
balls.
of those.
How many of those do
A
you
lot of
have?
those tchotchkes, as
Could
they
I get
say.
some golf balls?
Yeah, you want some golf balls. John's a golfer too. In fact, I think everybody here are in the IBM.
We had a
or
tea
the
time this
LTO
afternoon
team.
until you derailed us, Tom.
I did cancel
We were
that.
going to run this train on time, and we were going to be on the golf course in about 20 minutes.
Quite all right. The goal of the marketing team was really to do activities that would invoke demand generation. But early on, and I entered the LTO Consortium on the marketing team around Generation 2 again. And the goal then was not only, of course, to create or to influence demand generation, but to more basic than that, to increase the awareness of LTO technology and to get brand name recognition, just to get the name out there and make sure people were even aware of it and that it existed, and hopefully then invoke
Let me
a
interject
deeper
real quick.
conversation.
Just because he says Gen 2 doesn't mean that LTO had any mind share yet. In fact, the Gen 1 products from all three companies were a little on the lame side because of there was a lot of engineering involved, and there was a lot of pressure to get to market. We were really racing with each other. Gen 1 did not have a whole lot of penetration into DLT. It barely even got their attention.
I may
So-
take a liberty on the word lame. I think what John means is that the actual penetration or acceptance by customers wasn't real large yet.
And I would
The products were great, but the penetration.
I'd go
in the
so
industry
far as
wasn't
to
great.
say that the marketing team, that was the original marketing team, really didn't do much. Believe it or not, it was a guy named Dave Graves who subsequently retired and left, and he wasn't even a marketing guy. So Bruce really, even though he says Gen 2, it was the ground floor of the real serious push.
Still pretty much in its infancy, yeah. So back then we did a lot of things carrying on with what the first team had started, but we carried on with that and expanded it to get more brand awareness and that this is reliable technology and try to penetrate the marketplace. So we did a lot of press interviews, a lot of press releases. We did a lot of analyst interviews, really trying to educate the analyst community, which was very influential in that storage technology marketplace. And to get both press and analysts to write stories and white papers about the technology. And then, of course, hopefully their clients, like with Gardner and IDC, et cetera, would read about that information. And we then would publicize it also on the website, at business shows, which we started then, a lot more business shows, along with the business shows like with Gardner and IDC and Storage Decisions and others. And continually trying to get the brand awareness and mind share for LTO technology. We expanded that, of course, making the website even bigger, and then trying to get clients to the website. And to do that, we would advertise the website. So we started an advertising part of our budget. We would go to business shows and start collecting names so we could have those in a database for email blast. And in the email blast, we would then start to promote the white papers that we had, the news articles that were published, the website, and it just started to grow larger and larger until we had tens of thousands of names in this database of customers and potential customers that we could market to. That expanded even more to where it is today with not only the press releases, white papers, business shows, analysts and press relations, the website management communications, business conferences and expos around the world. And by the way, this is a worldwide marketing, not just the States, but in Europe and the Asia Pacific region, all the way around the world, to social media marketing. I mentioned the blog, but the LTO Consortium is also currently, they have a Twitter account and a LinkedIn account. There may also be a Facebook page, but I'm not sure, probably. That one I haven't looked at yet. And apparently that's going quite well. I was just looking at some stats on the blog page, and I was happy to see that hundreds of views of those blog pages have taken place for each individual blog. In fact, they even ranked them in the top 10 blogs, and it was interesting for me to see which ones they were reading the most of the things I've written. So that's kind of a lot of fun to see.
What's an example of what they read the most? What do they like?
Well, the LTFS, which is on this sleeve, by the way. I'm not getting paid for that. Linear tape file system is another part of the technology that was developed by, originally by IBM, but then adopted by the Consortium. But the LTFS articles are really high on the list. Another one was a blog about how LTO technology is very low cost, although highly reliable storage. That was another blog. That one's high on the list. Currently writing one, which will be fun to see how the audience reacts to it. Since we're near Halloween, this one will feature what I'm calling data goblins that can attack cyber attacks on organizations and steal information, steal IP information, and cause havoc in an organization. So that'll be interesting to see how that one is accepted and read by the audiences and the public. So lots of activities, as you mentioned, John. Some things that are more kind of behind the scenes that the marketing team would do would be to organize meetings with all of the licensees, which included not only the 3 technology provider companies, but of course the media licensees. And at those meetings, present what the marketing team has been doing to help promote the technology. And then also an opportunity for the technical and business team to present information to the whole group, to all of the licensees. And those are held maybe 3 or 4 times a year.
Yeah. We are, after all, a history museum, and so a lot of our interest is, say, in marketing challenges, campaigns back around what you would say Gen 2 or Gen 3.
Sure.
Can you recall? Some of the other comment I'd make is, as marketing folks sometimes say, if engineering can't fix it, we'll feature it. Perhaps there are some things you recall.
The early on challenges, yeah, very good question. Very good question. Again, the very initial part of the marketing campaigns, if you will, were to increase brand awareness, but very quickly we found resistance from the largest part of the market was owned by the DLT products. So it was a big challenge to really educate potential customers on what is this LTO Ultrium technology and how does that differentiate and what are the features and benefits of this technology versus the leader in the marketplace at that time, which was DLT. So that was a challenge. That was a big challenge, and we had to really put forth some very positive, without disparaging any other products that were out there, but very positive comparisons to show the differences, both not only on a technical level, but a usage level, and then on a economics level.
A couple of the big levers you had was the openness, because that was something that you could talk about without saying anything about that monopolist over there.
Definitely.
And the existence of the roadmap and the credit.
And that there were multiple providers of the technology was a really big benefit, and a lot of clients' eyes would widen when they heard that, the openness related to, and by the way, you can get this from a variety of providers, and they're all interchangeable and compatible.
And you can switch anytime you want.
Yeah, you can take a cartridge, let's say from Hewlett-Packard, and put that in a Seagate drive or an IBM drive, and it works, and back and forth. So that was very attractive.
As opposed to Super DLT and DLT, which had less availability and less interchangeability.
Correct. There was one provider, and you were, once you chose that, you're locked into that one provider.
To give you an example of some advantages we had, I don't know if Bruce marketed it. We certainly did have a modest media royalty, and we justified that in part because Bruce was doing what he was doing. He's doing this on behalf of everyone. Everyone benefits by growing the LTO piece of the pie. However, the DLT media royalty was onerous because they were sole proprietor, sole owner of the IP. they were disadvantaged from a media cost point of view initially. I don't know that they ever changed it or changed their business model, but I know that the media companies that tried to participate in DLT really chafed at the unreasonableness of the road.
I don't know, but I think ultimately Quantum licensed second or third sources, but
At what cost, though? See, we don't know.
it's always the
The
issue.
rumor has that there was a number of things that ultimately conspired to help Bruce win the day, but those were kind of the basic tenets, was the multiple suppliers.
And I appreciate you saying help Bruce, but it really was a very much of a team effort. So in each team, and John mentioned these teams before, that there's a legal team, an executive team, business, technical, marketing, etc. We worked as a team. The representative from HP, the representative from Certains or Seagate, Certains, and then now Quantum, and myself at that time, we worked closely together to develop these marketing plans and tactics and initiatives. And we would present that plan initially to the business team, and then after working with the business team on the plans, and then to the executive team, get those plans approved, and then for the next 12 months we would execute those plans.
Another fun thing that the marketing team did is they worked to keep the message fresh and relevant and up to date. It wasn't just, okay, here's the brochure we printed 5 years ago.
Oh, it changed
So it
everything.
was really fun bringing Bruce back to talk to the development team. It was really good for the development team's morale to get visibility to
Sure.
the message of the day. For example, I remember when we put encryption in LTO.
Oh, yeah.
You guys had a lot of fun with that. You had some funny themed commercials. I don't know if you ever followed through with those or not. What was
We
it?
did.
The
That
guy-
was a
the
lot of
guy
fun to
going
do
through
the
the
advertising
security
part.
check or something. I don't remember the details, but.
Yeah, that ad.
But see, my point is, as the world changed, all of a sudden there was a sensitivity to tapes falling off a truck or tapes getting stolen. Boom, encryption. Boom, whole new thing to go market.
I'll describe that ad. I can see it right now, which showed a businessman holding onto his briefcase going through the scanner at an airport. And he wanted to protect this information. And the ad was, you don't really need to do that.
He's
Because
laying on the conveyor
you're
belt to
actually
go
going
through
through
with
the
it.
scanner. He said, you don't need to do that. All you need to do is encrypt it. And that got into the encryption with
Did
LTO
that see
tape.
the light of day? Or?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, that was a great one. The initial ad, as I think back on it now, and I was not involved in this, it happened with the Gen 1, but it carried on, I think, a little bit into Gen 2, was a young girl roller skating that had a pillow tied to her backside, and the tagline on it was, "Everybody needs good backup." That was a pretty good one too. But we had lots of ads. At least one main theme each year, and sometimes it changed mid-year. So that was a lot of fun part of it.
Some more memorable themes?
Yeah, we had one that said the catch line was, "Are you running out of storage space?" And this is when we made each generation doubled in capacity, almost doubled for most generations. So this one showed a fellow that was just standing in his shorts and his the high top socks that had a garter holding him up, like the old days, trying to force a lot of clothing into a commercial-sized washing machine, and it was falling out, and he couldn't get it all in there. So that was the visual of need more space. And then, of course, it talked about how much capacity an LTO cartridge can hold.
And that was against DLT at that time. You had higher capacity,
No, not against DLT. I think, as Bruce stated, we were just trying to.
We never
promote
mentioned
our
DLT
stuff.
in an ad, or
We didn't even want to acknowledge that they existed.
but you were positioning yourself against DLT
Right.
positively,
definitely.
right? I mean, that's
Yeah.
That was the
Definitely.
game.
DLT was a great product, but there were some advantages to go with an open standard, and that's what we were really trying. And of course, the capacities that we were achieving with each generation, and the speeds of the drive too. So that was initial. The key competition back then was DLT, and of course, as I mentioned earlier on, to get awareness of the brand. It evolved later on as LTO technology garnered more and more market share, from 0 to, let's say, midway through on Gen 4, probably above 50% of the market share. It began to change as it got more and more market share, that the competition became another storage technology, which was disk technology and removable disk drives. So that became a new challenge. Customers, instead of choosing just the category of tape, they're choosing disk technology. So it wasn't LTO technology versus another tape technology. It was all tape as a category versus disk.
So an example of that is what they call virtual appliances. It became extremely prevalent in the industry for a period of time. I don't know if it still is, where you could take a bunch of disks, put them in a box, and put a tape personality on that box so that it responds like a tape drive to existing applications, etc., but it looks like a fast one.
Because most of those applications were written to talk to tape.
So they're just putting a personality on the front end that says, I'm a tape drive, talk to me like I'm a tape library, and I'm going to act like one. And then they were able over time to achieve cost points that were starting to threaten us. And there was the emergence of something called data deduplication, which was a huge enablement to make these little virtual, just a bunch of disks competitive with a real tape library, where they could remove, they could insert pointers in place of large. So let's say people are backing up and they're backing up the same Microsoft presentation file, and it's evolving maybe 2 sentences at a time. You know, why are you saving the whole damn thing every time you are protecting your information? Why don't you just take the big common chunks out, put a pointer there? And so that was, believe it or not, that was as much as a 15x capacity improvement for a bunch of disks. And you say, well, why didn't we do it in tape? You can't. The reason you can't is because when you're trying to reassemble the data, you got a tape in there, you're reading it, and it says, okay, go get that chunk over there, and that might be on a different tape cartridge. Mm-hmm. So then you got to go get that chunk and insert it. Then you got to put it back and come. The point is you can do it, but it's ugly. So that was an example of an emerging threat. When I left the business, I actually bought a company that does that.
Oh, was it?
Diligent.
Oh.
That was my acquisition before I left the business. So I don't know what today's environment is like.
And so how did you positively market your technology as opposed to, say, data duplicated disks?
The concept of storing information on disk is a really good one. And initially, in the early stages of when data gets put on disk, probably within the first 30 days, out of all the information that was put there during that 30 days, about only 5 to 10% of it is accessed again. At least 80%, and sometimes up to 90%, is never looked at again. And disk inherently is still, even today, more costly than tape, typically by an order of magnitude.
It's $1 per gigabyte of total storage cost.
Right.
Is it called total storage cost? Something like that. You guys got it. Yeah.
So
also,
to store all that data, go ahead.
Also, disk spin. There have been efforts made to turn off disks that are not in demand and restart them, but that leads to a whole bunch of reliability issues with most disks. And one thing that Bruce made great hay of was the greenness.
Right, yeah, getting that too, the green part of tape.
Because when tape is at rest, it uses 0 watts.
So to store all that information, 80 to 9% that's not accessed again on a more expensive real estate disk technology is a waste of that technology. It's very important technology because when you want to get the data fast, there's nothing going to be faster than disk, or today, of course, the solid state storage devices. So that's one area. So the economics of it. For instance, if it costs you $1 for tape, it's going to cost you $10 or more depending on the disk technology. But I'm talking really in this mid-range marketplace, not the high-end disk.
So in the high end, we addressed that issue very, very neatly, but for some reason we've never addressed it as neatly in the low end, in that we have what we call a disk cached tape library. So it is a real tape library. There is a real disk cache, but the disk cache is presenting a tape personality to the host. And what we do is we watch that.
You're jumping ahead.
Oh, okay.
But that is where it's going to
And then
evolve.
there's a
to.
management layer.
Yeah.
Well, what's taking you so long? I've been doing that in the enterprise since the 70s.
Yeah.
So, oh, please, go ahead.
Okay.
The point is you can reclaim disk space. You can identify dead data and move it off to tape and then reclaim the disk space. Because the other thing Bruce hasn't mentioned yet is scalability.
Yeah, but I'm getting to those.
Oh, I didn't know you were going there.
Yeah, I'm going there. I'm going
All
there.
right, I'll leave you alone. I'll go take a break.
No, you're great. You're great. It's a good agenda. So having it on that more expensive real estate is a waste of that real estate, but you do need it to get to the information fast. So that's one part of it. So making use of that valuable real estate, both real estates, is the economic part of it. Second part of it is that information on disk is at higher risk of losing that data than it is on tape, because tape is inherently what is termed an offline technology. So if you take a cartridge out of a tape drive, it's no longer connected. It has no more electrical connection to anything. And if it doesn't have an electrical connection, then no viruses, sabotage, disgruntled employees can get at it, assuming that it's in a safe place that's under lock and key. Where disk is always connected to electricity, so a virus, sabotage, disgruntled employee, somebody who knows the passwords can get at it and destroy it if they want to, or copy it and steal it if it's valuable information, like IP or customer addresses, social security numbers, etc. And there's a lot of that. In fact, that blog that I mentioned earlier talks about that in this current blog. So that's another aspect of having some form of storage that is totally protected and offline, segregated from system attachment. Which the advent of removable disk played a role in that, but removable disk then proved to be had less than desirable reliability. Just moving it around can cause that disk to be inaccessible, or not spinning it up, as you mentioned earlier, John, can cause it to be inaccessible.
I'll
It
tell you a
just
funny
fails.
story, especially if you're doing it with a consumer technology and you're probably talking to some degree about consumer disk. Facebook, when it got too big, and the concept of big data, the term was kind of invented for these social media companies that are basically keeping track of all of my bowel movements, it seems like. Facebook thought they'd never heard of tape. They're a bunch of kids. Does tape still exist? Really? Somebody makes that stuff? They put together a kludge library with rewritable Blu-ray DVD as their big data repository. Big refrigerator. Just buy the DVDs at Office Depot. So this is media that's not in a cartridge. It's not protected in any way. You can imagine what one of my consulting things, I mentioned some venture capitalists, so I was giving a venture capitalist some advice on, he was interested in knowing whether he should invest in and or acquire Facebook's technology. So I gave him long lectures on why you don't want to do that, why you don't want to base any real business critical mission to a consumer technology, and there's a whole bunch of reasons for it. It's not hardened, it's not, and basically he, it wasn't what he wanted to hear, and he kind of in a very polite way called me an idiot and thanked me for my time. It's public domain, so Facebook actually published a picture of their brainchild, that they've reinvented after hundreds of people already invented it. Guess what? Facebook came begging to IBM for tape about a year after that.
Oh, sure.
Absolutely.
Well, it's an interesting story. I'll talk about another one that shows when I was getting to the sabotage that can take place on disk technology, Google, and this is their story, their VP of their information technology talked about this, that they had a system error. So this wasn't sabotage, but it was just a systems error that caused them to lose tens of thousands, I'll use that, I think it was millions, but we'll just say tens of thousands of Gmail accounts. And this glitch affected the backup also. So it was a disk-to-disk backup. So not only was the primary copy of the Gmail accounts destroyed by this system's error, but it affected the backup also. It just replicated itself to the backup. Fortunately, using LTO tape, they had backups before that weren't affected by the system's glitch, and they were able to recover everything. It took them a little while, as it would whether it was disk or tape, but it took them a little while, but they were able to recover everything pretty much same day. So
Pretty
that's
remarkable.
so what we would
Same
do.
page.
We'd find out these stories to help publicize these value points or benefits of using tape. Doesn't mean you don't use disk. You do need disk for those very fast inquiries. But for all this, for the original copy of all the data, and then all the data that's not being accessed, put it on tape and remove it from disk for those various reasons. The economics, the security of it. And then as well as the tape has a very, as you mentioned earlier, a very green footprint. A cartridge on a shelf draws no power, so it's totally green. Even a tape drive, when idle, draws very little power. Even when it's active with a cartridge in it, it's still far less the amount of power that's used from disks. Some studies have shown it's 200 to 300 times less energy consuming than mid-range disk technology. That alone typically is enough to justify a complete purchase of tape technology versus the similar amount of petabytes in disk technology.
For the backup and the protection types of
Yep.
applications. Not for the
Just
mission.
the green part of it.
Right.
Just the green savings alone will justify a purchase in a complete tape system.
Sure. As a ex-hard disk drive guy, this is fascinating, and I'd like to go on for hours, but John won't let me.
No, I won't.
So if we could back up, I think you had mentioned somewheres around Gen 4 or 5, LTO had achieved about a 40% penetration.
To 3, and I did say 4, between 3 and 4 it was over 50%, I believe, my memory serves me right, of against other tape technologies in that category of mid-range tape of market share, and by Gen 5 it was over 90%.
So, and one of the features you clearly...
This is according to analyst data, not
Of
our
course.
data.
And one of the features you suggested was in part responsible for that success was the open consortium leading to lower prices and multiple choices. The benefits to the customer are obvious: lower prices, choice, opportunity to move. What are some of the other features and benefits that you used to drive that improvement in market share that you recall? Get back to the campaigns that you thought, allowed the features and benefits of LTO that drove that incredible success in market improvement.
Sure. Well, I mentioned the economics. That was key, because that's the first thing on the checklist of a CFO.
Established roadmap credibility over time. That wasn't there on
Having a
Gen 2.
published roadmap, it was the first published roadmap. So showing currently it goes out to 10 generations, and they've the LTO Consortium is now, they just announced the specs for Gen 7, and some of the providers have even announced product now for Gen 7. So having that roadmap 2 or 3 generations out really gives customers confidence that this is an ongoing technology that we can rely on for many years to come. There's typically about 2 to 3 years between generations.
Also, the roadmap has some compatibility interchange requirements between generations that were probably a little better than some of the competitors. I don't remember.
That's right. The paradigm is still holding true that a Gen 6 drive today can read and write a Gen 6 cartridge, read and write a Gen 5 cartridge, and read a Gen 4 cartridge.
This is investment protection.
Yeah.
So let's say somebody wants to move to the new technology. Let's say it's faster, for example. This happens to be faster. But they're not ready to rebuy 100,000 cartridges. They want to keep milking that investment until they have to buy new cartridges. This protects them and holds their hand all the way through that decision process.
Yep.
So the drive technology, which is capital investment, the media technology tends to be expense. So you've got your machines and you got your paper, right? Those can proceed in different financial cycles.
So yeah, this compatibility between generations is another key selling point to get to your question.
Because I
did you achieve it?
believe Super DLT announced when they announced their intentions to do it. I'm pretty sure they were going to break compatibility with prior DLT because of the technology made them. I don't think that they were real vocal about it, but I think we knew about it, and I think we used the information. That's a big deal when you ask your customers to buy new media and new technology.
I mean, going back to, in tape time, in reel-to-reel, that was always a requirement, I think, from the 727 perhaps right through to the 3420.
Yeah, the
big part
difference-
of tape
yeah.
culture.
The difference being that the first 40 years of tape accomplished 2 orders of magnitude of moving the football on Moore's Law. And then the last 15 years of tape I was in was 4 more orders of magnitude. So, I mean, being able to read a 7-track 1957 tape wasn't as big a challenge as it would be today. In fact, if we had to read a 3480 tape, I'm not sure we'd know what to do at this point.
Well, some features that were, to go along with your question about what else helped make it so popular. One feature that was added in Gen 4 was worm technology, so write once, read many. And it was a different cartridge, and you could tell it just visually looking at it because the bottom half of the cartridge would be gray. And that if data was written to that cartridge, it couldn't be changed, couldn't be modified, couldn't be erased. So for some industries like insurance and attorney offices, etc., wherever there may be, even also government regulation, that the data written has to be unalterable, that really served a great purpose.
Is that what this does?
That's another physical way to do it. Sure, you can say it's not.
But in other words, in the worm version, this doesn't exist as an option. It's just
Yeah, that one can be turned on and
hard
off.
coded.
In a worm version, you can't change the data.
Now, is that the media is not changeable, or is this some sort of electronics?
It's electronics. It's electronic recognition that the customer, by moving this switch, and there's something that will sense that when you load the cartridge, does not want this cartridge to be overwritten under any circumstances.
Yeah, but the worm cartridge, whether the switch is moved or not, you can't change. You can't alter the data on the
Okay,
cartridge.
let's add one minor piece of detail, and then I'll let you tell them what a great marketing success this was. Now, Bruce knows something uncomfortable is about to happen. One of the early requirements, Sony hadn't gone away yet, they hadn't given up, and they announced something called Super AIT. They were one of those 8mm to reel guys like Exabyte. In fact, they were providing Exabyte with the Exabyte's media. Super AIT, what was super about AIT? They took a little bitty piece of semiconductor memory, stuck it in the cartridge, put some information in that memory like, hi, I'm a Super AIT and my volume number is so-and-so and you know, my whatever is in there. I could tell you if you really want to know. And it turns out it was not a contactless access. When you loaded the cartridge, they actually had to reach in and make an electrical connection to read that information and utilize that information. From an engineering perspective, we thought that was a worthless requirement. It's superfluous, it's redundant, it's unnecessary, it's bullshit. But the marketing people said, well, how are we going to beat Super AIT if we don't have cartridge memory? So we put cartridge memory in, and in order to avoid all the Sony stuff, we put a contactless version in so that you didn't have to establish an electrical connection. I think it's an infrared connection, I don't recall. Cartridge memory access, I think, is infrared.
Not infrared, it's
RFID.
Yeah,
Oh, it's RFI, right.
Yeah.
So I was going to let you tell how successful you marketed cartridge memory.
We really did, actually, it's an interesting part of the concept. We really didn't market that it has that cartridge chip in it unless asked, typically.
We could never
Because
figure out
most
what to put in
customers,
there.
they wanted to know what the features and benefits were. They didn't really want to know, well, how does the gasoline engine work inside? Most wanted to know what are the key features and benefits, the overview. But sometimes we had to get into technical discussion, or giving it at a business conference if we're making a presentation. There may be 1 or 2 people out there that are pretty tech heavy and want to know those kind of details, so then we would talk about it. But it is interesting that cartridge memory has proved to help a lot in implementing some of these technologies like worm, and the next one is
Sure.
encryption.
So that's how you tell.
And encryption actually came in Gen 3, if memory serves me right.
The other way, encryption was 4 and worm was 3.
Oh, is that right? Oh, okay.
Encryption went into Jaguar first.
Okay. And encryption is very helpful, as we mentioned a little bit earlier, in protecting this data. So if you're going to take a cartridge, fill it with data, and put it in a FedEx envelope and ship it across the country, if that gets in the wrong hands, you don't want anybody to be able to read it. as well as just being in your own organization. You want to protect that sensitive information, whether it's employee information, customer information, IP, et cetera. So easy to encrypt it, and it doesn't impede the speed of the drive or anything.
And it's another differentiator of tape from lots of other things, including CPUs, disk drives, because encryption is a performance hit when you're doing real-time data processing.
On other systems.
And there's been resistance to the total adoption of encryption to protect the whole chain of data chain.
Mm-hmm.
But we had literal incidences of tapes falling off a truck, and then some poor company's got to buy 100,000 free credit reports for the customers.
Yeah, right.
And so that was a huge thing that was somewhat, at the time when I left the business, it was pretty much tape was the only people encrypting data at rest.
Right. And it had no impact on the performance of the tape system.
So it sounds like capacity was more or less parity during that transition. You were a little bit ahead. They'd announced the product 10% higher, but capacity wasn't really a issue, nor were many of the speeds and feeds issues, data rate. That it was fundamentally successfully driven by the three things we
No,
talked
it was still
about.
very important to have jumps in capacity, jumps in speed to as the capacity increased, you still needed to have enough speed to go along with it to get the job done in a particular period of time, a reasonable amount of time, and to compete against either other tape formats, although they were dwindling by that time in Gen 4 and 5, but also to compete against the disk technology again to show that tape is not the bottleneck in the scheme of moving data around an environment. The bottleneck is typically the disk or the application, but not the tape system. So it was important to have speed in the tape system as well.
One of the things that is fundamentally true about tape is if you're just streaming data, if it's just quarter horse and not thoroughbred, if it's just ears back, straight down the track, it's hard to beat tape performance. You just can't beat it.
Oh, it's impossible to beat tape. As most of the benchmarks, tape in that application is really, really good.
Disk evolved to get away from, during this time, probably in Gen 4 and 5, evolved at getting away from using tape-written applications to do backup to disk.
So they started writing their own.
Yeah, just disk-to-disk backup, just using operating system technology, and then some applications so they could track where data is, which disk system is it on, et cetera. Is this disk system on-site, off-site? Where did we replicate to? The advent of the data deduplication came into effect where using the same disk real estate, you can get 10 to 15 times the amount of data on there by reducing the data. It's a reduction technology.
Redundancy of the data, yeah.
So we're competing with that advent also. And to compete against that, we showed how the tape system, even though we're not reducing the data, is still less expensive than even deduped data. So the price point was still very important there. That
And
was
it
the
kind of
key
depends
part
on
of
the
it.
data. It's very data dependent, just like compression is. So
Yeah, some of this.
a tremendous example of redundant data would be eternally forwarded emails to hundreds of people.
Oh, right.
So there's one original note in there.
Yep.
And so, for example, an email repository looks pretty good on a decompressed, on a
Right.
deduped disk.
Okay.
Yeah,
But,
some data is looked at once. It's not deduping because dedupe needs to see multiple iterations of that
But
data.
sonar data doesn't even compress.
Yeah,
Voice
it
doesn't
doesn't.
even compress.
Videos, all this rich media information doesn't reduce.
So switching a little bit from your LTO hat to now your IBM hat, sort of wrapping up without revealing anything proprietary, but how did you compete, say, with the IBM tape deck against your partners in the consortium? What were some of the features and benefits that you publicly asserted?
It's an interesting question. Do we want to get into
In
that?
other words,
in
how
this
did we
discussion?
differentiate from HP?
And
I
it's-
think that's another discussion another day, but
Yeah.
let me tell you something that I think I'm comfortable telling you. IBM, earlier I talked about a fun story about how we're going to divide royalties. Way back in the beginning. Okay, we're assuming they'll come. If we sell it, we hope they'll buy it, and I'm talking about licensees now. HP, Seagate, and IBM all came into that discussion with the perspective of their go-to-market capability, their channel, and without discussing it, IBM knew that we were largely retail, we were largely IBM server-oriented, kind of knew what our volumes would be. We figured we'd be the lowest volume participant, was what we were thinking at the time. I'm talking pre-Gen 1. So we came in saying, well, we think the royalty should be split according to how much IP was contributed by the individual company. And of course, I had a boatload because we had invented track following servo and they'd never even done it before. We had a boatload. Well, this, as you can imagine, sat really well with Seagate and HP. They're like, now Seagate was primarily an OEM company. They had some pretty big OEM customers. Brad mentioned some earlier. One of the ones you didn't mention was Dell, very high volume. So Seagate proposed that the royalties be split according to who drove the most volume of LTO. HP came into that conversation and didn't really have any channel advantage or IP advantage, and they said 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. So believe it or not, the initial royalty was set, and I'm talking about royalties on cartridges. Every single cartridge has a taxed LTO on it. And I told you I wouldn't tell you the number, but I will tell you it's not divisible by 3. The hell is that all about? Why are you dividing it by 3 and it's not? So I was going to talk about a channel dynamic that actually, he's marketing the category, he's doing a great job. Now, what about the war between IBM, HP, Seagate? What I can tell you is that a lady named Carly Fiorona, in between Gen 1 and Gen 2, bought Compaq. HP acquired Compaq. Compaq was Dell's mortal enemy. Dell had been buying all their LTO from HP. Michael Dell publicly said, no new business with HP. And we were trying to get into the OEM channel, but we're just no good at it. IBM, I think Brad already described, it was a new thing for tape. They'd been doing it in disc, but we'd never done it in tape. We didn't know how to do it. We didn't have an infrastructure for supporting those customers. We had to learn it all. So we had a little traction in Gen 1, but not very much. A few small library makers, reintegrators. This opened the door at Dell. Dell wanted LTO. By then, Dell had committed to LTO and was abandoning DLT because it was hard doing business with Quantum because of their monopolistic or their proprietary situation. We won Gen 2 at Dell. I don't think that's public, but they had a choice of Seagate or IBM, and they had history with Seagate where it wasn't as big a company to support. Dell is a tough customer. They're kind of like the Walmart of the OEM chain. There's a lot of bars you got to jump to sell product to Dell, and they beat you up on price. And at any rate, long story short, the channel dynamics at the end of the day weren't anything like what we thought they were going to be when we were having those earlier royalty division discussions. And when you win a Dell, you suddenly have a cost absorption infrastructure that's huge, because now you are selling tens and hundreds of thousands of things instead of 3,000 and 4,000 things. And you can leverage that in a lot of ways in your business. Not only does it naturally give you a better cost position to differentiate within the category, but we also were able to get derivative products off of the LTO wheelbase, differentiate them by taking it to a different cartridge, putting in some frosting on the cake, like encryption or whatever things we did in Jaguar before we did them in RAB-F. I don't think we ever did in LTO, but we did that in Jaguar.
A version of it with LTO. And
basically sell that same LTO cost base into the enterprise channel for $25,000 a pop instead of $1,500 a pop. So the point is, it was not so much us differentiating from each other. First of all, Bruce was never really in the role to do that. He was really very committed to the LTO, and we had other people attempting to make that differentiation. I mean, maybe you were involved, I didn't remember that somewhat. It was hard to differentiate our products. I mean, price and availability and maybe some reliability claims. Performance was it dictated, or did we allow ranges of performance?
Ranges.
Okay, so there could potentially be But I think everybody went to the top, right? So
Right.
we would all be the same. Nobody wanted to be the slowest tape drive. So it was hard to do, but the channel kind of sorted it out. So Seagate kind of found its niche and its market share. HP got its, and IBM got this surprising Christmas present, and so we, no further differentiation is necessary. We've got the best price if we want to give somebody the best price. We don't always want to give it to them.
Well, IBM.
In fact, did you know Quantum's? This was public. Quantum ended up basically exiting the production of LTO and is sharing HP's supply chain. Quantum is still participating in helping write specs, getting royalty, but they're actually dependent on HP for the actual product.
I wanted to add something too. In this chronology of moving through the generations, it occurred with Gen 5. So Worm in Gen 3, encryption in Gen 4, and in Gen 5, brainchild of Ed, who's going to be the next speaker, so this may lead into Ed's presentation
Yeah, let's
too.
do it.
And that is I mentioned that, well actually John mentioned, but I reiterated that disk technology early on started to emulate tape. And then of course they went all disk and the applications were changed so that it was just disk to disk talking. The brainchild or the synapse that occurred for Ed was, well, why don't we have tape emulate disk? So let's write the data to tape in such a way that it presents itself to the user as disk technology. So that now that one last thing left for tape, it has all these benefits. The last one was ease of use. So instead of having to have proprietary applications that write data to tape, in 20 years from now, you need that application. You've got to recreate that application environment to access that data on tape. Instead, why don't we write it in such a way so that 20 years from now, you don't need any of those proprietary applications. You can access the data as if it was a disk drive. It looks like a disk drive and presents itself like a disk drive.
Yeah, and that we will move to that. That's a good segue. But one of the things.
Well, let me just give the name of that, and that's this product here
Yeah.
called Linear Tape File System, which was then created by IBM and then adopted by the LTO Consortium, and is now actually the development is continued with SNIA, I believe. Is that right?
SNIA is managing the spec, we're still doing the development.
Oh, okay. So
Would
SNIA,
you repeat what was said
I was looking
offline?
at Ed there. SNIA is managing the specification for it now, and the development's still being done by IBM and maybe one or two others on the technical
And
front.
there's a huge piece of significance to Bruce's last comment that I wanted to amplify on. There, many different technologies have attempted to make marketing hay out of something called the notion of media life. And optics is 75 years, and there's a war out there, and it's all based on voodoo math, and it's a total bunch of BS, but it used to be a huge marketing war between various technologies. It turns out there is a truth to useful media life. There is a painful truth that a tape written in 1957 is still got all the information on it, but there's no machine to read it. That's the real thing that creates obsolescence of media. It has nothing to do with mean times to failures and magnetic things not being magnetic anymore. It has nothing to do with any of that. And so if he is suggesting that there might be a way to improve the picture of recovering in the future because you've simplified something to a lower common denominator standard, if you will, it's important. So there is a true value proposition there. That did happen after I left, and I know Ed's the father of that. So let's move on.
Just one follow-up, sort of a summary perhaps. Tell me if I misunderstood. But so it sounds like IBM entered this with a channel that it had established. It really was, I think, John, you said the three companies at Consortium really were in different channels, and therefore.
You're talking about channels to market.
I'm sorry?
You're talking about channels to market,
Yes, channels to market.
as opposed to recording channels. So just check.
Yeah, I'm an engineer, and I should be
Okay.
talking about recording channels, but I'm talking about channels to market. And even though IBM did have a fairly extensive hard drive channel,
For
OEM channel, it didn't initially see that as the
Well,
OEM
believe
channel.
it or not, as we were working on Gen 1, IBM was slowly but surely starting to exit the OEM channel. And in fact, the people that started our original OEM team, Dave Walling, Glenn Allen, came from the hard disk OEM channel to establish a tape OEM channel. And I think what was happening there was that there was a long-term positioning ultimately to divest the disc business to Hitachi Internet. But I want to reinforce something I said right at the beginning of this meeting. You know, us getting together and talking about the channel conflict would have been a thoroughly inappropriate, illegal discussion. We all kind of knew that there wasn't a lot of channel conflict, which helped us be comfortable about tying the knot. But we never discussed it overtly, and still don't, because that's arguably antitrust and potentially. It turns out that the channel that resulted just didn't happen to be the channel we originally visualized. We figured we would be mainly IBM Blue market and maybe some business partners, some small OEMs, other automation manufacturers, but we never imagined that we would be a high volume, low cost supplier to another enterprise. That was a lucky outcome.
Continuing our LTO discussion with John Teal. He's now joined by Ed Childers.
Okay, without further ado, Ed, like me, was one of the founding members of LTO. And although in retrospect it was a heck of a lot of fun, there's also a lot of pain that I probably forgot about. And I'm going to let you introduce yourself and talk about it.
All right, thanks. So bio first, I guess. I started at IBM, 78 or 79. I've been in data storage most of my time. I started off with a big floppy disk thing that was supposed to be a competitor to HDD. Then Prospector was the code name at the time. Then went to a floppy disk program that was essentially the founding technology for iOmega, if you remember that in the day. I forget what we called it.
Bluegill.
Bluegill. Thanks. That's where you were the program developer of that at the time, if I remember. Yeah, that's right. Bluegill. Took a stint in printer development, then went into optical, and I moved into tape when IBM exited the optical business and dropped into the LTO development part of the business. Actually, I worked for a short time buying DDS for you, John, before we started LTO. So that was kind of the timeline and scenario.
Well, I think you got to live through a couple of years of Condor, but also.
Yeah, I was media responsibility for a while before I actually got into the LTO part of the business. Well, LTO started when I was media responsibility prior to LTO starting is a better way of putting it. Now I'm responsible for development of tape drives and LTFS in IBM, and still the LTO technical representative to the TPC Consortium, as John was describing previously. So that's the background, who I am. I made a couple notes while I was listening to John and other people talk. So,
College education?
Oh, I have a bachelor's in mechanical engineering from UT Austin and a master's in mechanical engineering and servo controls from the University of Arizona.
Married, children?
Single, children, 4, yes, grown, happy, different part of life. So, my notes, one thing you mentioned about the LTO TPC, the whole kind of initial thing there, my memory is that, like you said, like John had mentioned, I should put it that way, we entered this when HP and Seagate when DLT was winning the world because there was a department server in every closet with a tape drive on it. And that had grown to be a huge business that, frankly, IBM missed and HP and Quantum also missed. So we were all looking at it enviously. HP Seagate missed. Quantum, dumb luck, fell into it, I guess is the way to put it. So we were all looking at that enviously. HP and Seagate from the bottom DDS upward and IBM from the enterprise downward. And this is one of these things like butterfly wings change the events of history, where we lucked into it also internally at IBM because at the same time as John mentioned, Vanderslice was our group leader for the HDD business, and there was a big focus on making that a component business, if you will, inside of IBM. And we were his poster child of white space opportunity for what could you do in the HDD business to actually grow it. You can grow it by entering this other big business called $1.5 billion DLT business, component business, that kind of simulated the HDD business, but on the tape side. And I don't know if you remember, John, but we actually got pulled out of the tape GPD division and put into the component division, the LTO team, while the rest of the tape business was still in the other division for a while, because we were viewed as a component business inside of IBM for quite a while. So we survived kind of by luck in that sense, that there was an interest in developing a component business that segued into this tape business, if you will, in the channel stuff that John was talking about. But it was kind of interesting that the initial desire was maybe not to develop a LTO infrastructure tape business, but really to sell components in a way. And my memory was, as we got invited to the party, Seagate and HP were already trying to do something along this line, but they didn't have timing-based servo, and that was the key that got us in the door. And our desire was, if we come, we want to bring the 3570 AK XL. They said yes, but of course, as we said, that didn't end up going anywhere. I don't think you mentioned it, but we were named the Brewers at the time because we didn't want to have the world know what we were doing, so there was a lot of secrecy on the meetings and such. But the most interesting thing to me, looking backwards on that, is that the idea that we could create a open specification that 3 or more people could compete in based on standards in tape was actually never done before. All tape drives had always been developed kind of hand in hand with the media manufacturer, and you get to a point where you make it work and you say, you keep doing that, we'll keep doing this, and we write specs based on working together long enough to make sure it worked. And but not really understanding the requirements, because our channel on our head has different things in it than somebody else's does. So all tape drives were, at the time, were always proprietary thing. Sony did their thing, Quantum did their thing. Maybe you could call DDS, HP, and Sony at the time semi-open, but they didn't have an open standard. They just all developed kind of together and said, okay, we'll all do it this way. So there's a lot of skepticism, especially in the IBM tape business, that this could even be accomplished, that you could write a spec that people could develop too. And like John said, we got into a lot of issues on what are we specifying, how do we spec it so that it will work without disclosing implementation details. That was a big issue, as we said. We had the secret sauce rule sort of thing. And trying to figure out at the end of the day, once we did it, how do we tell if it actually, somebody meets the spec, when inherently to measure the thing, you have to be somebody capable enough to actually build a drive, for example. You can't test a format without a drive capable of reading the format. If you were to pay somebody to go, here's a format, go tell me if it's correct, they would essentially have to develop a whole tape drive and channel and everything independently just to go do that. So the idea that IBM, HP, and Quantum were going to go compete, but we were going to set up a open table certification process to verify that we all do it when we were the only ones who were capable of doing it at the time, was quite an interesting discussion. And we evolved into a process we called the bootstrap, where we would actually have a fair means of exchange and test each other's formats. And it worked out. It was actually, I wouldn't say surprising, but listening here, I forgot so many of the pain points we went through trying to get this thing to work. What else did I have that I wanted? Oh, we had a big issue on what was spec'd. Is it just what's in your hand to be able to interchange, or were there going to be some piece of quality or reliability in that spec? In other words, does it have to operate once so you could read it and it could fall apart, or does it have to be able to run 100 passes, 2 years, 3 years? Some of our partners were really wanting to put quality into the spec because they wanted to essentially be able to market that this thing was designed for a certain price point is what performance point was my memory. At the end of the day, talking through it, you can't really have a spec that specs quality, and we ended up having a spec that specs performance, format in hand, if we called it, but no measure on reliability, how many times they have to do it. And in fact, all we're really doing in the consortium is certifying that licensees have demonstrated the capability to produce product that conforms to the spec. We're not guaranteeing any level of reliability, life, and things like that. So that was a real process that we had to go through trying to get there. A lot of arguments, a lot of meetings, a lot of time spent in neutral locations trying to fight this out between IBM and HP and Quantum.
It was very cloak and dagger.
Yeah, we had the neutral location rule, because anytime you're negotiating something, it was perceived, and I think it's true, that if you went to somebody's home turf, they had a psychological comfort advantage, could go home, whatever. And we always had to go to a neutral location to have all these discussions. I don't think we ever had a meeting in one person or other's backyard in this whole time, which meant we ended up in places like Las Vegas and San Francisco and
I'm off
San Diego.
camera, I'm sorry, this is John. Ed mentioned the brewers because we were brewing something up. And we each had nicknames. And the important thing is when we met in a neutral location, like Ed describes, there was nothing indicating the presence of IBM, Seagate, or HP.
it was Heineken,
Guinness, and something.
probably Budweiser.
No, IBM was Guinness, HP was Heineken, and Seagate was Foster's.
That's what it was.
However, I do vividly remember once, we went to, I think, the old Hilton at San Francisco Airport that's long since been torn down. We went into a room to have our meeting, and there were these notes all over the room that said things like LTO who? LTO what? LTO. It turns out the DLT people had been there the day before having a meeting, had somehow gotten wind of our secret meeting the next
That's
day
funny.
and left us all these love notes in the conference room.
So that plus, like Bruce said, establishing a roadmap. We put together a roadmap, arbitrarily decided 4 generations. We'd always have at least 4 generations in the roadmap at the time. I remember, what was it? Generation 4 we said would be AME media because it was the shiny technology at a time, but it was really just to multiply everything by 2 each generation, and we finally decided, well, we need to show something cool for the 4th generation, and we picked AME, which still hasn't happened. But also cultural between the companies was interesting, and so, like I said, IBM entered this whole thing from the enterprise looking down enviously at the open market. HP and Quantum entered it looking up. And as such, they had different things, different cultures, if you will. HP seemed to be much more organized on structure and consensus and getting an agreement prior to this. I personally think it was probably due to the fact that in a big volume business, you have to be darn sure what you're going to go do, and you can't be fragmented. IBM entered it from we're all scientists arguing about what we think is best, more of an academic sort of thing in a way almost. And we get into these meetings where we'd be negotiating something and we'd get to a point where we get off the script with HP and they would freeze like the Borg and say, we have to go caucus. And they'd go off and talk about it and come back, where IBM would talk out loud in meetings, which would sometimes piss some of us off. I remember because we would agree on something without ever having talked about it internally, and we'd have to try to back up or clean it up afterwards. So it was a really interesting, I wouldn't say a clash of culture, it was more like a marriage across cultures, if you will. And I believe the only way anything like this would only work is if you had 3 people. If you had more than 3, you'd form voting blocks that would, essentially get stalemated. If you had less than any even number, you would form deadlocks. And this only worked because there was 3 people that couldn't always agree. And at the end of the day, we were all mutually dependent upon each of us agreeing to go forward to market and make some money. So there was a mechanism to force consensus, i.e. you wanted to get out the door, but there was also a lucky break, and the 3 of us prevented, we'll say, blocks forming that would kind of stalemate agreement too. Where do we go from there? Oh, I have an opinion on the DLT thing, on why we were successful. I think DLT, in one sense, made a classic mistake in, they were 70 terabytes, no, I'm sorry, megabytes at the time. Gigabytes? What is gigabytes? Yeah. I'm getting off on 70 gigabytes at the time we announced LTO to be 100. And the expectation would be their next product would have been 140 gigabytes because they had previously done 35. And when we announced this thing, they stuck in a new thing called Super DLT at 110 or 20 and tried to make it backward compatible with the old one by adding 2 heads, something like it. I can't remember the details of that. But the net of it is it fell flat in the market and helped LTO actually, I think, get acceleration because it didn't succeed very well, and LTO hit and 3 people doing it, and away we went. I think DLT then tried to say they were open also by recruiting Tandberg or Benchmark or somebody like that to say they're making DLT drives also. But it was kind of too little too late, and I think they could have just held the course and said, well, we're 70 now, and come up with their own 2x roadmap for 4 generations and say we'll be 140 between LTO 1 and 2, and they might have turned the tide a little bit better on trying to compete in an open format sort of environment. But businesses are the way they are because it's hard for somebody who's getting revenue for a thing to be the one to take the chance to risk it and change their business model. And so Quantum took a leap and failed, and LTO took off in my viewpoint there. And in fact, having this open roadmap inside of IBM at least turned out to be one of the best things we could have done, because IBM is also a company where you have a lot of people with opinions saying what the features and speeds and feeds should be. And one of the primary way development teams fail is at the last minute you start adding things to it to try to be more competitive. You get nervous that it's not high enough capacity, it's not high enough data rate, and we need to tweak it higher to make it more competitive at the last minute, and that's when you choke. And the advantage of the LTO consortium was, and still is, that we set a roadmap, is the agreement with the consortium. You don't go dork with that roadmap. It is what it is, and you're resistant to people coming in and saying, I think you need to increase the capacity by 20% or do something by 30% to make it more competitive because it's a defined open spec. And that allows you to put your head down and actually do things that you plan on doing and not get distracted by a crisis that rises or a new person coming in and feeling that where a product set needs to be modified to be more interesting somewhere.
There was also an element of job security. We've made a commitment.
Yeah, we've made a commitment. We're a part of this consortium. Yeah. Yeah, if you can't be quiet, you have to come back.
Yes, sorry.
But we talked about that before,
We
how
did, yeah.
the roadmap was actually and is actually a very positive thing from a development planning point of view, of you know what you're going to do once you get an agreement with the consortium, and you know it's not going to change. So you can put your head down, develop the product, not have somebody come in and try to
No
put
requirements
you
creep.
off. Yeah, thank you. Requirements creep was the word I should use, yeah.
Because we could always just turn around and say, well, you'll have to talk to HP and Seagate about that. I'm not going to.
Yeah. We got to get a consensus to change that particular thing. So that was very powerful in the tape industry, I think, is to get that consensus, get it established, both externally from a marketing point of view, as Brad and Bruce were talking about it, but unexpectedly from a development point of view internally. You can plan your technology. You know what you're going to need 4 years from now because it's going to be a 4X thing, and you can plan your investments in heads or whatever to prepare for that roadmap, which you know you're going to get to. The only question is it a 2-year or a 2.5 or a 3-year turn? But you know what's happening. So, talked a little bit about DLT, cultural change. Inside of IBM, LTO is also kind of a cultural change from the established tape business. It was seeded by you from people like me, optical refugees, probably about, what, 10, 12?
A lot of optical refugees, because we mentioned in passing when Vanderslice came in, he came to Tucson. Here we were in the process of killing tape and keeping optics. Jim came down and gave tape a big shot in the arm and got us back in business, as Ed described.
And killed optics.
And here's what he said about optics. He told this story about some couples that agreed to go out to dinner in Abilene. 6 months. 6 months went by. Nobody really wanted to go to Abilene for dinner, but they'd already agreed they were going to do it. I forget the punchline of that story, but he used that for optics, like, and he finally said, $200 million spent, 0 returned, case closed. And I remember you guys had Abilene signs in your labs. I don't remember
since I
why.
still work at IBM, I'm not going to talk about too much confidential stuff. But since you're retired, you can.
Yeah.
But the fact that we stopped optics and moved that resource to tape and seeded it with some tape people at the same time, picked up the Japan team, which was also the ex-optics team for code. The optics business had been a commodity business. We were making single card optical drive aimed at the commodity business. So there was kind of a different mindset of the people coming from the optical team merging with the tape team, which was a big enterprise business. Actually was the right thing to do in LTO. It actually worked out better than I think we could have ever expected.
I would give you even more credit than that. The tape team was very enterprise-centric. We didn't know any other way to do it, but to make it absolutely bulletproof, and that wasn't required for LTO. Optics team not only brought the open systems perspective, a lot of new blood, new ways to do things. I think it was critical.
Yeah, it's interesting how, like I said, butterfly wings of fate. You know, this was something that happened where the skills came together and it worked well. There was kind of 3 major disruptions, if you will, from what IBM had been doing and what we did in LTO. It was drastically different tape path and form factor, from big pneumatics and air-bearing controls stuff to simple rollers and small form factor. It was a single card of electronics and a controller, which we had before, multiple cards in a big card pack sort of thing. And as you mentioned also earlier, a drastically different head technology, an HDD leveraged flathead sort of thing versus a spherical head, specially lapped sort of thing. So all those were viewed as it can't be done initially, and as things works out, it worked. It could be done, and it evolved into LTO, which we had then leveraged into our enterprise business eventually. So, and those 2 things work well together for IBM. It's kind of LTO is the industry that is if it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger sort of thing. You learn stuff in LTO we would never learn in enterprise, just because of the magnitude of the market and the places that it gets, and drives coming back with spider webs inside of them and stuff like that you never see in enterprise. And the enterprise gets the stuff that high-end customers want, like RAVF, which we did eventually roll into LTO. Not in the same form, it was just a sparse writing. We don't go sweep it up.
You leave it out there.
Yeah, we just leave it sparse.
Yeah, but how many applications does LTO get behind that need it?
None.
So is marketing.
Yeah, so it's marketing. Well, I wouldn't say none, but not many. It was done because we could.
Amplify on the optics point again, and this is a little out of school, but I am retired. I think we mentioned earlier that LTO was not popular at IBM. It was an enterprise-centric place. We had business leadership, Charlie Andrews, Bob Manus, people that were very skeptical about our ability to be competitive, didn't want to hurt the enterprise business model. And I literally got no bid from certain Tucson tape teams when I was attempting to put an organization together to actually do the development. I got no bid internally. You're crazy, won't work, we can't do this, by other tape people. So if it wasn't for the optical kind of good bad thing that happened there, we would have never gone to IBM Japan and found those resources. We would have never done the things that turned out to be the exact right things to become successful. I remember I did not get a great appraisal one year, and I told my boss, I get the feeling I'm succeeding at something you don't want done. And he said, you're right. But LTO is protected funding. It wasn't in-plan funding. IBM had this white space bucket held up at the corporate level by a guy named Dave Johnson. And as long as Dave was satisfied with our progress, he funded us outside of the process. So the local management, no matter whether they liked it or not, couldn't do a whole heck of a lot about it.
Yeah, so that's why I said, it's just, sometimes we like to try to go back and put together the pieces
Act like we knew what we were
to act
doing.
like it was intelligent design and it was all this sort of really thought out strategy. And sometimes in looking back, it's actually, that's why I was saying the butterfly wings of fate is that it came together in the right way that actually worked out that probably wouldn't have worked out if we had not had those factors come together at the right time. And you're right, it was interesting inside of IBM to watch when we finally got the first LTO drive together to be running and get tested. It was kind of eye-opening that it actually was really reliable. It was quite a surprise to many that you could do something in this regime. But that's the way technology always works out, right? I mean, somebody does something somebody doesn't think can really get done and proves it works, and then everybody goes, oh, then we're going to go that way. And it happens inside of companies and it happens in the industry. That was just an example of inside the company. We had a mindset and a method of doing something that we were able, because of the investment, to do something a different way that turned out to be more successful and have more legs on it, that kept the business going for, 15 more years from that point on, still going today. Just released
Part of our panel
LTO
discussion,
7.
we're going to talk about the outlook for tape, because I have
Yeah.
serious concerns. We got 3 more formats left and 3 players.
Yeah. Well, I think when you start getting there, it's not much different from disk or flash. I mean, there's 2.5 disk guys, there's 2.5 tape guys, 2.5 media guys, there's 4 flash guys. So I think that's a broader thing, that the whole industry has built this business on top of taking commodities and putting intelligent software on it. That was our whole life. So run away from the commodity market.
Mm-hmm.
And now the real shift is no more commodities. And so we're adjusting to a no more commodity storage business going forward, both in disk and in tape, and eventually in flash. And that's the real interesting thing, I think. But we're off topic.
No, that's actually an interesting topic, but it is more future, and yeah, I guess it is a little off topic, but an interesting one nonetheless. Anyhow, turning back to the topic, you mentioned a couple of things like no air bearings, which is probably an internal decision. Maybe Seagate had air bearings, and maybe HP did, and it's not proprietary now because I could go buy that drive and see it. And I don't want to know about LTO 7, but looking back at LTO 1 and 2, or maybe even 0, could both of you guys, I think, step me through some of those driving compromises, which I take it were driven towards low cost, particularly
Well,
the
there's
emphasis on the cartridge?
There's 2 conversations there that, one of them is the decisions we made in our implementation. But the real driver was whoever made this decision. And this was a huge part of Ed's life.
Yeah.
The world didn't really need another form factor
Yeah.
of media.
Actually, I think it did, and I'd really like to hear you guys talk about that.
And I'm going to encourage Ed to tell a
All
little
right,
bit
so-
of the story, because he was on the twig. He had the front row seat on this whole deal.
Yeah, like Johnson, my first job was to go convince HP and Quantum to use 3590 cartridge, which immediately failed at, because, as we said, they were both from the DDS world looking up, and it was an absolute imperative that there'd be a half-high form factor, and that fundamentally by math, laws of physics, unless you create antimatter, you can't get that cartridge up and down in a half-high form factor. Can't be done. So we had to come up with a thinner, smaller cartridge to do that. The big fight became over the features around the thing. Does it look like a DLT? Does it look like something new? This dog bone thing in the end was a huge fight on how do you decide to thread it, because everybody's threader had to accomplish this thing. So the evolution of that was, what's the minimum thing we can all agree on? It's called a pin. I mean, all the other proposals were something more around it, like that leader block or a half moon shape or something that would integrate into a person's tape drive easier, that particular person's implementation.
A dog star.
But, yeah, like a dog star.
No threader.
No threader. The pin became the least common denominator thing that everybody could agree on.
But I
That's
thought
really
that
what it came down.
I thought the judgment criteria was not least common denominator by, but it was something on the order of technical excellence or best
Best of
mode.
breed.
Best of breed. So it sounds like
That's a fuzzy line sometimes, right?
that is true.
Sometimes if there is only one thing that is an intersection of what everybody thinks they can do, that becomes both the least common denominator and the best of breed by definition. These little notches on the side are interesting because we had a huge fight over, do you take, there's not a DLT, but do you take a 3590 notch and put it on LTO, the distance from the end, so the pickers that were designed for 3590 cartridges could pick this thing? Or do you take a DLT notch, and if a picker's designed for DLT can take this thing?
I didn't remember
And
that. That's interesting. Yeah.
And because we couldn't agree, we put both of them in there. So if you held up a 3590 cartridge, you'll see this notch is exactly like that notch. If you hold up a DLT, actually this is the DLT, this is the 3590. This little funny angle in here is the DLT notch. And that was to get agreement between the IBM, HP, and Quantum, who were all designing pickers for different things and wanting to leverage their picker design. Now we marketed it as a feature because it's more reliable. You say the drive holds on the one, the picker grabs the other. That's a revisionist history thing, but the original was we just couldn't agree on anything. That's probably confidential, but it's old enough it probably doesn't matter.
You were on the toughest twig by far. Because the cartridge, when you think about it, everything else needed to do 100 gigabytes. I mean, we had our internal execution problems, changing heads, but the technology, most of it was known. There was not a lot of big technical risk other than,
A whole new mechanism.
and that drove the whole new mechanism, that drove the unbelievable pain that we had internally. I have no idea what it, and like I said, that's another story, another day, and probably even another set of people. Ed could bring back some engineers someday.
This thing, unfortunately, all of us in the room negotiating this cartridge were fundamentally people that had no experience on cartridges.
Probably good.
I didn't. I came from optical. The guys at HP that were negotiating it were Kitty Hawk guys, the ex-HDD guys, and I can't remember who from Seagate.
Those were tape guys, I think, but they had never been in the cartridge business.
So we were all arguing about things none of us really knew about that much, and we ended up hiring a retired cartridge designer from another company, the Cheesehead,
Leif Erickson.
to come in and be the voice of reason to say, you really can't do that in a high production environment. This is what you have to do. And I would say that guy probably influenced the details of the design much more than any one of us who were just arguing our position.
That was a good move to get that guy, and he had retired from 3M/Summation. He had probably 35 years of designing cartridges for high production, quarter-inch cartridges, Coyote cartridges.
He would come in and say, high volume molding, the tolerance you can live with on something that wall thickness is X, and we all go, okay,
He just knew,
yeah.
and he could just tell us.
Did you name him? Who was he?
Oh, his name was Leif Erickson.
Like the Viking.
Yes.
Like the Viking.
And
Only
Leif,
guy I knew that ever in a expensive shabu shabu dinner shish kebabbed his sushi and boiled it.
yeah, we were, he was from Wisconsin and an avid Green Bay fan, and raw fish was not his thing, and we went to Japan and we were having one of these dinners where they had the hot pot. You stick the meat in like sukiyaki, or what they called it, shabu shabu.
Shabu shabu.
And they
and
served the raw
sushi.
fish as an appetizer, and you'd take his raw fish and put it in the hot pot and cook it, and then you'd eat it. Good times.
I noticed
Anyway,
the-
Leaf is still around somewhere, and I think we gave him plenty of love.
Minnesota,
I mean,
yeah, as far as I know.
I noticed I think, maybe it's my a lack of knowledge, the tape comes out of the cartridge at a right angle as opposed to say the way the tape comes out of the prior cartridges?
Yeah, and in previous tape paths, the tape would come out so that you could pull it forward. And you'd pull it way up to a big air bearing, and you have these very long tape paths. And I remember trying to draw that on the board would always result in a picture that didn't look very good, because you have this big tape path and the two reels way back here. And the reason for the length was, in that concept, the idea was the reels were noisy, and so you had to get the tape and the head a long way away from this noisy stuff and control it with guides and everything to get the stresses off of those guides so you didn't damage the edge of tape. And so it's this concept of longer the tape path, the better for being able to manage the mechanical motion.
We did go into that in great detail.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
they know what
and
you're
so-
talking about, is my point.
Coming back to LTO, you obviously can't do that in a little form factor like this, so it had to be a short tape path, and the only way in a short tape path is to get it out and around the head is to bring it out the side and bring it up. And it also necessitated a new way of tracking, because in a short tape path, the tape beam strength is high. So that's where we came up with the whole idea of, surface-based guiding, don't control the tape, follow the tape, all that kind of stuff. But
Well,
that's
let
an
me
implementation thing.
let me amplify on the difficulty of Ed's job. He's got to agree on all the details of that cartridge, but he's not allowed to have a tape path discussion. He's not allowed to have a how are you going to thread it discussion. So these guys are literally attempting to agree on something that is crucial without really even being able to share their thoughts about what they're going to do with it.
And so one of the technical issues along those lines was, do you just start the magnetic tape at the leader pin and live with it? Or do you put something stiffer, a leader tape, in this thing to make it easier to thread without dinking the tape up? We had a huge fight about that.
Yeah, there used to be something called leader tapes on some technology implementations that were stiffer than the media, because maybe you want
Well,
to
DLT
shove
had
it through something. DLT, well, maybe your threading is not really threading. You're shoving something stiff through there, and then eventually you can cinch it all up. But how do you have that conversation without talking about how you plan to do the threading?
Implementation, yeah. So we
Which
had a
is
huge
strictly
fight
off
about
limits.
that. We, IBM, were interested in a leader tape because we thought it would make it easier to thread. Others were not, because they felt it would add cost, and that leader tape takes away from place to put capacity, and if you're worried about technology capacity optimization, you don't want a leader tape. So we fought, never got an agreement, ended up without a leader tape. And one of the other partners came back after partway through LTO 1 and said, I think we should have a leader tape now.
Really?
Yeah. And so we added it back
Did you?
in after we started
Was it Gen 1 or did
Gen 1.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, after we started, because one of the implementers decided it was a good idea after all. And we reached a consensus.
Boy, we
after the
really
fact.
let that guy off the hook, didn't we?
We did.
We could have just jammed it. and said,
You don't
"No way."
recall this, obviously, but we were thinking about not agreeing to extract something.
That's right. We wanted some, yeah.
But we got nice, because we wanted it too. So,
So you sort of agreed it had to be short to fit the form factor, but how you actually were going to thread it was sort of left to the vendors, and you
us-
couldn't disclose it.
yeah, we couldn't disclose it. That was a competitive thing. Obviously, 3 companies who are in a business all teaming up on let's mutually design something and implement something, go to market. There were concerns on a competitive nature sort of thing. So as John said, the line was drawn where you can talk about specification for interchange, but not implementation.
But supposing Ed is sitting there, let's say this pen has been proposed by HP and Seagate, and Ed looks at it, and in his mind, he has no clue of how he would thread this device. Let's just pretend like you didn't. That is when Ed could say, all right, show me. show me your secret sauce on how you're gonna do it, because I don't see a way to do it. And if I can't see a way to do it, I can't agree to it. And that would have been an example. I don't think we ever got to that point on the leader pin, but it was close.
Not on the other hand, we had, like you said, S&R once and something else. We only had like maybe
That was
two
the only one I
secret
remember.
sauces things, maybe total.
So it's interesting. You guys pretty much on the technical side were able to agree on all really incredible set of specifications when you think
In a
about
pretty
it. With only
short amount
really
of time.
two big controversies, S&R and
Well, that was Gen 2.
that was Gen 2.
Yeah, the cartridge
Gen
stuff
1,
was all Gen 1.
the biggest controversy on Gen 1, other than the details of the cartridge, because that was where real heavy lifting, this was new.
But you got through.
Everything else we were borrowing from other pieces of. The only other controversy was the one I already described on the argument about which compression to use.
But I think that there's, again, the thing that kind of made it work is one that engineers are always engineers for the most part, and they want to figure out how to do stuff. And so that helped. And the other thing is that it required a lot of personal negotiation relationship skills. And so I think we evolved into roles where that became the thing that was most required to be successful. And everybody had a different style. I remember one of the vendors brought in somebody specifically to counteract you. He introduced himself that way.
I don't remember who that
Yeah,
was.
I'll tell you off camera.
Okay.
But so there's a lot of how do we deal with each other and get what we want and not create warfare between companies. So there's a lot of relationship management that had to go into it.
I had a pretty aggressive personality, as you've already probably figured out. And when I thought I knew what I wanted, that's what I wanted. But the HP guy is as aggressive as I was. He would become more stubborn, almost. And so I agree with Ed. I'm not sure the management team helped, but you guys were able to do it at
Yeah.
your level. But seems like all we did was fight.
I always felt like the thing that was unsung and unrecognized in the whole LTO thing was not the technical, obviously, but the ability to work with another company productively and get it done and not be we didn't have escalations, but a handful of times.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think we ever inside of IBM, anybody in the corporation really understood or even today understands the difficulty maybe on getting agreement between three independent companies with different incentives. And like I said, it's just because we all had a mutual need to be able to go to market that you get, at the end of the day, agreeing on something to go forward in a horse trade. Trade
Yep.
off what I need versus what they need, and becomes a barter system almost.
I'd like to amplify on something Ed mentioned regarding verification. So it was as technical as it was marketing as much as it was technical, that we have a means of certifying that whoever wanted to ship a product with LTO on it was in conformance. And the onus was on us to declare whether they're in conformance or not, because we were protecting the LTO brand. Plus, Bruce could take that independent proof of compliance and use that as a bit of a marketing apple. How do you do it? Ed mentioned how you did it, but he kind of glossed over how hard it really was. The actual media is pretty easy. There was many generations of ANSI standards that taught us what you need to know about the media. It's mostly a functional spec, but there are some other things. But there are things that are not in the spec that would surprise you. You don't put the coercivity particle in there. You put a functional thing in there like the S&R must be, and the media manufacturer says, how do I meet it? Ed referred to, what if a media manufacturer doesn't use the media formulation that we think he's going to use, and comes out with something that is in compliance, but it wears our heads out in 2 days. Well, believe it or not, that's a conundrum, and we couldn't solve it. If they do, they do, and we'll just have to let their reputation in the marketplace be the policeman of that.
Essentially, that's what, yeah, exactly.
So we kind of knew when a media vendor shipped us one of these and said, I'm ready to go, they would have to pay a fee for the compliance testing. We had an independent third-party contractor who would do all the physicals, all the measurements, right down to the fiduciaries down to the fractions of an inch to make sure it was compliant. But the drive one was harder. So what a specification, an interchange specification, specifies is how to write the tape. It does not specify how to read it, because interchange is based upon what state did the last person who touched that leave it in, and is that a valid state? So you would be surprised at how tricky it is to write an interchange specification. It's kind of more than meets the eye and less than meets the eye at kind of the same time. So now the question was, all right, there was no collaboration on schedules, no collaboration on implementation. That was arguably illegal. So none of us knew our schedules. Supposing HP declared that they're ready to go on Gen 1 and they send in their check for certification and they send in the test cartridges. We had specified you got to supply 10 cartridges that you've written, and then we're going to verify that they were written up to the specification, and then we will either agree that you did or you didn't. Well, so what about the scenario where HP's ready? I haven't even figured out how to read the damn tape yet. That's how far behind schedule I am. Let's pretend Seagate is equally far behind schedule. What next? Well, here's what happens. Seagate and IBM could not legally filibuster HP just because our schedule sucked and theirs didn't. So we actually had a timer that said the other two companies have 2 months or whatever it was, 2 weeks, 2 years, I don't remember how long it was,
Find fault with cause.
to find fault with cause. And if no fault with cause is reported, you're free to go. And if it's discovered after the fact you made some mistakes, guess what the new revision of the standard is, and we got to conform because we were late. So in other words, the antitrust, the pro-competitive element of this was protected like all, 6 ways from Sunday, it seemed like. And I'm giving you an example of, how we crafted that language. Now, the reality is that nobody ever got so far ahead that the other guy couldn't read a tape. Everybody, I thought, behaved very honestly in this system. There was no gaming. Because when you say fault with cause, you've got to prove, okay, you wrote that interblock gap is too large, or whatever it was we were picking on. There was a whole other element of this involved timing-based servo formatting, but that was the media manufacturer's job. And I know how they verify format in factory. I have no idea how Mac does it, or if we ever even let them do it.
They don't do anything on the format in
Okay.
cartridge, just the LPOS is all.
But just the planning of this verification process was an enormous amount of work, and I know I was involved in almost all of it, because
It was all Gen 1 stuff.
all Gen 1, and also because HP and Seagate generally had never participated in standards bodies.
That's
Like you
true.
said, they kind of agreed on what they were going to do. If there was a spec, it was after the fact. And
So you didn't specify a standard reader that the written cartridge had to work with in,
well, for things like
varying-
SNR, I think we established, okay, you're going to have a head. It's going to have certain characteristics, gap lengths, whatever. You're measuring, but in a lot of cases, all of the requirements were relative. So something else I forgot that I think Ed was more involved in than I was is that we had reference tapes.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
That was so you have a media gets sent into MAC, the certification entity, and it's supposed to meet a spec, but all specs are referenced, like the platinum bar in Paris, the meter thing. So you have a reference tape that everybody gets, and you measure your performance in your method to that reference tape, and you correlate it to what the certifying entity does. So it was a series of standards, if you will.
So
is the
for
only way it
example,
works.
you'd say, okay, write a density pattern, measure the SNR. SNR shall be within plus or minus something of the same apparatus doing the same thing on a reference tape that's been provided to you.
Gold
So that way,
standard,
if there's some
silver
variation in who's supplying the test heads, and we take a lot of that variation out by the relativity
Everybody's channel is different, stuff
Channels
like
are
that.
different.
Except as you pointed out.
And there were arguments about who's going to supply heads to the verification entity, and I don't know if we ever supplied any. I think we kind of tried to duck all the time. Sir?
Yeah, so John, are you happy with where we are at this point on our discussion with Ed?
Well, I did want you to talk about the cartridge. You did. That was kind of, to me, that was one of the most important things about LTO. Why don't you, I didn't know there was a Gen 7.
Yeah.
I didn't know there was a Gen 10.
There's a roadmap, just like we did the other roadmap, multiply out. I'll make one comment on this whole thing from my perspective. The thing that is most disruptive, changing in the tape industry was when DLT was there, it was all these plethora of proprietary formats. There was no competition. Tape was really expensive, and disc was going gangbusters back then. That was the 40% a year disc days, and tape was 10% a year, and it wasn't moving. It would have died without an LTO. And what LTO really did is force all the media vendors to compete on the same thing. Prices came down, dollars per terabyte went up and became competitive on a rate with disc. Primarily because we created a standard that people had to go compete on, both drive and tape. I mean, there's as many people died in the tape industry on the drive side as the media side over the last 10 years.
Yeah.
You know, it's not
Probably
like
more
it was
attrition.
one,
Well, you're right.
more
both.
attrition maybe on the drive,
No, it was both.
but it was like a hard medicine thing. Tape would have been dead in 2002 if we kept on the same path we had, all these fragmented proprietary formats and HDD taking off like it did. But LTO forced this competitive nature, trial by fire, you survived it or you didn't, but it drove the price per gigabyte of tape at a rate 40% a year that became more competitive than disc because disc slowed down after that period. And it was, everybody loves to hate LTO if you're in the business because it's competitive, it's too, can't make money, it's yada, 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 yada. But I always say if you didn't have an LTO, there wouldn't be a tape business
There
at all.
wouldn't be a Jaguar.
We wouldn't have a Jaguar, we wouldn't have any enterprise tape. It would be, DDS would have been the last thing out the door, essentially.
DLT'd still be shipping
Yeah.
it.
So that's really, I think, the legacy of LTO is it
And I'd like to
got the tape
amplify on
business
that.
through the squeeze point, if you will.
The
of
amplification
legacy.
is in a bigger discussion of the evolution of tape technology that we've had on other days. And I didn't say that about LTO because I knew you were going to say it. But I did say that the standards that became legacy, formats that became super successful legacy, things that belong in a history museum, were all pretty much had multiple industry participants practicing. 3480, LTO, 3590, nobody ever followed us. It would have been nice if they would have. I think 3590 would have been a more successful product. 3480 certainly was more successful when Fujitsu made one, and because it consolidated large pieces of the market on a platform that we had a dog in the race. And so now you see the exact same thing with LTO. The sparklers I was going to encourage Ed to do, and maybe we can pull the panel members up, was this has taken over the universe, with the exception of two enterprise proprietary formats, one from IBM and one from Oracle. To the best of my knowledge, this is it.
That is it, yeah.
This is it.
There's nothing else. I
And what worries me is it's a little scary because I do firmly believe that there is a long-term forever requirement for tape or a solution that has tape's attributes for the ultimate emergency, the ultimate disaster, the end of the world. And it really bothers me that we've only got two companies producing this thing. I mean, the drive. And I think maybe two or three producing this.
Yeah,
I think Fuji, Maxell's still in the game.
there's three.
Sony's in the game, something like that. Three guys. Because I lived at IBM for a long number of years. And I imagine Ed still has to justify his existence on a monthly basis because it was kind of that bad when I left the business. So I wouldn't rely on IBM to continue. You know, and HP's had similar problems inside of their business, I know. And it kind of scares me that the tape could disappear altogether and there's nothing to replace it. Because that would drive everything very suboptimal, in my opinion, if you were subbing disc for tape everywhere.
Well, the big transition that's happening now in the tape industry is moving from a backup to an archive. As we talked about, backup is pretty much getting disc to disc to cloud or whatever, but the underlying scaling thing that's happened that is keeping tape relevant is that at the same time that data growth is expanding, which is fundamentally because bandwidth got better. Now you can get data from point A to point B, data has value, so everybody keeps everything.
We used to have to put
Purely
cartridges
bandwidth.
on an airplane. Now they can put it to a
So
wire.
bandwidth has gotten better, data growth has rocketed up, everybody talks about the data explosion, and at the same time HDD has literally slowed quite down. And so the problem is in the data center, this balancing equation of your data is growing at the same rate that HDD can support, that's stopped, no longer happens. Data's growing at 300%, disk growing at 10% CAGR, you have an equation that doesn't close. A lot of the whole cloud thing are people saying, I don't know what to do with this, I'm gonna pay somebody else to solve that problem for me. That's why people pay the cloud, because but at the end of the day, there aren't Keebler else in the cloud. It has to be something, and that's where tape is finding its niche, is it's the balancing of the equation in the data center. If data's growing faster than HDD can support it, tape fills the niche for part of that.
I was telling a story about how tape got to Facebook, finally.
Our final session today on LTO, John Teal will actually act as a moderator and talk to our three other panelists about LTO. John?
Okay, thank you all for your time today. The construct for this session that I had in mind was to start with the who, what, why. A little bit of insight into what it was like having decided who, what, why. And I'd like at this point, the reason the Computer History Museum is here is because it has been recognized that at the Computer History Museum there's some vacuum column tape drives. You won't see a 3480 and you won't see an LTO. And the storage special interest group that Tom and I are part of recognized that that was two major holes in the storage piece of the Computer History Museum. 3480, pretty obvious in retrospect that was legacy, that was big. So what I'd like to know is something about the success of LTO. In other words, we're moving from who, what, why to impact on the market. Maybe some sparklers, if you have any sparklers. Maybe your own theories on why you think it was successful other than part of what we've discussed. Maybe start with how many LTO drives have been shipped in the universe. I don't know.
Sure. To date, so from the year 2000 to now, there's been over 5 million drives shipped and over 280 million cartridges.
Wow. I don't recall.
I don't have a sparkler on how much data that is. I mean, there's probably some calculation like going to here to the moon and around. If we strung all those tapes together, probably 100,000 times, but I don't know. I don't know if there's a sparkler like that or not, but it's a lot. It's a lot of cartridges worldwide, all industries, been extremely successful.
How would you think that compared to 3480 at its, do you have any feeling? Because my guess is it's an order of magnitude or two, even larger than 3480 was. Well, the drives, maybe not the media, I don't know.
Media too. I mean, you just compare the capacities of what each could hold. I mean, it's far surpasses 3480, 3490, anything that's been out there.
Any other comments on the impact?
Well, from an IBM perspective, I think we benefited in a couple ways. And we had this whole business that you're well acquainted with, where we had all of those industry formats. When I first showed up in 1998, we had all those products because our individual server product lines, whether it was the PC division or the AS400 division or the RISC system, some of them had 8mm, some of them had 4mm, some of them had quick, some of them had them under the covers. And then they, as a result of that, they wanted to have some level of automation associated with it. So we had this whole business within our own organization that really provided those kinds of solutions to those customers. So we had small automation with all these different formats. So while it didn't take off in the OEM channel right away, or the IBM offering perspective, we did a pretty effective job cannibalizing our own business and replacing these other formats that we had been selling with LTO format, right? So we convinced our AS400 brethren to adopt the LTO format. We convinced the RISC, we got the PC company to start to remarket LTO. So while we weren't in Gen 1 necessarily taking over the world, we had this internal source where we could take this format and we could put it into the IBM channel with IBM sales forces and make it the preferred format across the IBM server product line. And we had a lot of success with that. The second area, I think, where we timed it right is we had a very strong fiber channel offering with Gen 2, and that was at the same time that storage area networks were starting to take off within our customer businesses. So this idea of a shared library really drove the not only the disk world, but the tape library world, where instead of selling 2 or 3 drives, we would sell a large library with 10, 12, 16 LTO tape drives in it, all attached to a fiber channel network and shareable across multiple servers, which from a customer perspective was great because they didn't have to dedicate specific servers to specific drives. They can now share the assets. So, and we already sort of knew how to do that from the enterprise world. This was not a new set of skills. We had people on the disk technology and the tape technology that knew about storage area networks and knew how to set them up. So we found ourselves in Gen 2 in a really good position strategically, and that's, I think, when if you looked at the bow wave effect, that's when it really kicked in for IBM with the storage area networks, with our fiber channel offerings with Gen 2. By then it had been established in the marketplace that we really were able to bring out a second generation of a product. We weren't just a one-hit wonder. So all those things kind of came together in the 2002, 2003 time frame. Your timing was perfect, Bruce. You got the...
Yeah, gent.
Yeah.
So I'll answer it in a little bit more globally perspective from an industry thing. No storage, no technology is actually just competing against itself. You know, tape competes against other storage technologies. And at the time when this started, tape was a going out of business from an industry perspective because it was proprietary, fragmented. The consumer was falling out of love with tape at that time. The consumer base was going away. We were stopping going to Blockbuster and getting VHS tapes and getting DVRs or DVDs. And so not only were we losing the consumer base in the industry, which is a huge cost issue, the rate of technology progression was slow because of the fragmentation of the various formats. And that was at the same time that HDD was, how big of HDD do you want in your PC laptop thing? And they were really going into the consumer in a huge way. So they were going faster than they'd been in years and years. So we were in an environment where consumer base collapsing, HDD going crazy, and the desire in the industry was to invest in growth industries. You'd be an idiot to put $1 into tape when all of this HDD was growing at 40% a year and there was unlimited demand and the consumer was going away from you. So that was the environment of the tape industry at the time we started LTO, frankly.
So bridging from that, and I have a computer history hat on right now, not an IBM hat, so I don't have to be nice. It seems to me that LTO failed in one sense. I think in the beginning we thought that when we hung the shingle out, if you will, in November of 2007 and said licenses are for sale, if this industry was so fragmented and if people were so desperate, how come all of those other people didn't buy a license and get in the game? Why did they just allow themselves to go away? And that's a drive maker question, a media maker question. It seems like LTO could have done so much more to stimulate automation and maybe even develop some standards that would enable people to switch out stuff in and out of automation. So in other words, you didn't sell very many licenses is my point, and why do you think that is?
Well, I think it is, well, we can answer it a couple ways. We've sold enough is the point.
3.
4 at the time, right?
Was there a fourth?
5 media vendors, 6 media vendors for Tamberg too at the time. But
Well, the media vendors came on board, but the drive makers just,
yeah, so
the
the
Exabyte didn't jump in. Maybe
right,
they
'cause
were
all
already
had a
dead.
vested interest. I mean, LTO, whether we think it's successful from a volume licensee point of view, I don't know, but it's clearly successful from forcing a competition in the industry that allowed it to compete with hard disk. That was the point I was aiming at earlier. How many do you need to do that? Enough, 3, 4, something
I
like
would have
that.
thought the more the merrier.
But I think that you got to realize, like somebody like Quantum, there's a business unit that's making money hand over foot with a proprietary format, and there'd have to be somebody inside that company that's going to say, I'm going to take a risk to cannibalize this moneymaker to go after a new thing called LTO.
Insurance policy.
so-
Internal business insurance policy.
So
How could you
Quantum-
afford not to?
Quantum did it by buying Seagate eventually, right? That was their insurance policy. They said, I've rode this until it's not successful, then I'll buy the competitor. Sony rode theirs until they weren't competitive. I think it's inherent in any big company where if it's making a lot of money, the risk of a business decision maker to say, I'm going to kill that and go after something else is a odd thing to happen. It's not typical.
I think that's a great answer for big businesses that are diverse and also doing other things. But a lot of these people that we're talking about were in fact one-trick ponies. I would think from an Exabyte point of view, from a Tandberg data point of view, very capable Norwegian company, they could have come in and competed here. They had MR heads, they had track following and quarter inch. I can't for the life of me understand why they didn't
Well, Tamberg did.
buy an LTO license and produce.
Tamberg did.
Did they produce? I don't remember.
They did. They were unsuccessful. Why they were unsuccessful, I don't know. That'd be a talk to Eric and ask him what the hell happened in the business sort of thing. But they were one who did
Do you know what generation? I don't remember.
either 2 or 3
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they were
around there.
Around that
I
time
can't
frame.
remember exactly.
'Cause they were-
Fujitsu also bought a license.
I
at the
didn't know that
beginning.
either. Okay.
At the very beginning, they never produced a product to my memory, but they did also enter. You remember they had the Diana large form pack tape drive with rollers that somebody in our company said we'll never buy a tape drive that has a roller in it. Somebody sitting in the room, I think, said that. They bought a license. I think Exabyte was wholly dependent upon Sony and had a whole business model that was buying a consumer-based thing and turning it into a data product. So
But that was going on. Quantum had practically killed them before LTO came
yeah,
on.
and I think they just couldn't make that transition because they didn't have a technology base. I don't know facts with Exabyte. I'm just between the lines. All the technology was developed at Sony, as far as I know, and they just bought it and put it in a different package. And so when they had to shift to a new thing, they could have maybe gone to a IBM, HP, or Quantum or something to go buy that thing from them and then try to turn it into an LTO drive. But why would we sell them the bricks to go do what we wanted to do ourselves? The only company I know that maybe could have done it was Benchmark at the time. I forget. You remember they were.
Yeah, that
there.
was they were.
So I think the companies who were like an Exabyte, what's the old Trevan guy? Anyway,
A bunch of them.
they were taking consumer-based tape that were in camcorders and stuff, produced by a Sony, a Panasonic, or somebody like that, taking the engine and putting something around it to make a product. And when the technology shifted, they had no juice to go do the new technology. So the companies you mentioned that had it, Tamberg, Fujitsu, they both tried. Why they failed, I don't know.
Okay, interesting.
To kind of follow on to that, from a marketing perspective, I think it's really a matter of perception. The marketplace at the time, the key competitor way back in the beginning, being DLT versus now LTO, which is an open standard, to them to say, well, I've got one provider here in the current market shareholder, and now I'm looking at this open standard where there's 3 or 4 drive providers and 6 media providers. That's a lot. So the original question you had was, why wasn't there more? To the marketplace, that seemed like a lot already.
And I didn't mean more out of the chute. I meant over time, you would think that as LTO was becoming successful, that it would have attracted more, and that was really the basis of the
I think
question.
the other answer is at the same time is the fact that
if you had a dime to invest in technology at the time, you probably would put it in an HDD solution or something, because that was the thing that was really growing at the time.
Yes, but now I'm being a slimy reporter here on purpose. I'm presupposing that now we're in Gen 4, LTO's clearly got legs. You don't have that argument anymore that you know about where you're going to put that dime, because it's looking like a sure thing. And it seems like you should have been able to start attracting more competitors instead of less. And I'm going to be even a little more critical on the media side. Was that an industry volume demand just didn't support 6 vendors, or what happened there? Did your capability run away from half of them, or what happened on the media side?
I think one dimension of this is really hard stuff. It's not easy to transition from one of those other technology platforms that we talked about, one of the other tape platforms, to LTO. And each of the companies we mentioned would have a slightly different challenge, because they'd have different assets and liabilities and different skill sets. But it's really hard. They'd have to fill some gaps regardless of where they were, and it would be expensive. So it's one of those discussions, as Ed kind of alluded, well, we can milk this business we're in for some period of time, or we can come up with probably a very large investment to get into this other model where I've already got entrenched competitors. What am I going to do better than they're going to do, given that we're all meeting the same specifications?
Some of those might be library vendors that could have gotten to the drive business, but then it's that make versus buy decision. Well, we could buy it and OEM the drives in and put them in our libraries where we already have an investment, instead of gearing up, like you're saying, to get into the drive business or even the media business.
Well,
think
I'm going to go back to Ed here. I'm sorry, but real quickly, I just wanted to clarify my comment on automation. Seems like LTO could have been more aggressive in terms of standardizing the universal picker of the universe, rather than accommodating 2 things that happen to exist. And that would have arguably increased participation by the makers of those types of products. And then you know, starting with just standardizing around the cartridge, you could have expanded into other ways of getting automation vendors to conform to LTO. But anyway,
I thought that part of the discussion was really good. I saw that as a big development, flexibility with the LTO.
so we got 2 things
Two
going.
things.
Sorry, Ed.
On the first, media vendors surviving.
Yeah.
I don't know facts again on this. My personal feeling is that was a case where some media vendors had business models that assumed a high margin product. They had infrastructure assuming a high margin return on what they were doing. They didn't have a large consumer base on anything.
Nothing hardly anymore.
And those guys died first. And the people who had a consumer or other base to help lay off some of them, that were more commodity-based businesses, tended to survive. So I think there was a business model, a shift from the high-margin dinosaur sort of businesses to the commodity, more competitive businesses.
And that sort of implies that there was a world capacity in excess of demand, because you're right. Once upon a time, there was an infrastructure to pop out gazillions of VCR tapes, and it's gone.
The longer, or another way of putting that is that as tape left the consumer industry, there was an oversupply of capacity. And the people who survived were the ones that had a business infrastructure that could compete in the cost structure at the time. The ones that didn't died. And it died on 2 ends of that. All the really cheap, like Turkey and Korea and all these places that were making VHS tapes by the gazillions, those died, of course. The guys that focused their business on high margin enterprise sort of tape products only, they died. And only the guys that had a consumer and enterprise kind of both business model internally to their media business are the ones that tended to survive. So I think it's just economics in that sense. Now, to your other question, the other thread,
Yeah.
I think it is true that LTO would have done better, or it arguably would make sense to have standardized interfaces that mattered to automation, so that the SCSI connector is in the same place, so you didn't have to dork with cabling, that the throat height and the way you insert is in the same way, so that theoretically a vendor could say, I can buy any one of these tape drives
and plug it into my thing, just like
Modularize the world.
just like a disk drive vendor can plug in any HDD into their rack and make it work because they're all exactly the same. We, of course, couldn't agree on those details in the consortium, and that's where we might have arguably fallen short from a true open. But there was some talk about that, but we never could get a consensus. So I think that is a place that the consortium could have done better in retrospect.
But maybe it doesn't matter now that you're headed to this cloud archive thing. It's all going to be big boxes, right?
Well, it is an interesting thing that the tape has gone from the aggregation at the mainframe, big tape, reel-to-reel, 3480, 3490, to a distribution in department servers all over the world. That's DLT sort of stuff. LTO entered that, and now it's going back again, but now the mainframe and that aggregation is called cloud or hybrid cloud. So it's actually going back to a place where tape is more competitive, because tape is more competitive at scale, of course. So big libraries make more sense than small libraries because you're amortizing cost of mechanism across more cartridges. And that's actually a positive sign for the tape industry, because that aggregation is making tape more competitive than less.
All right, I am Mr. Big Cloud. And you're asking me to adopt clearly a very good technology that I can only get from two people who have demonstrated intermittent lapses in commitment.
So
Is there some reason I shouldn't be scrambling for an alternative to
Yeah.
tape in that
I'm
application?
sure that people do. Dollars count. So when you're a big cloud, these little differences in cost add up to be big differences in cost. So they're more focused on dollars count. And that concern of how many vendors doing it is also offset with the fact that now disk drive vendors are only a couple too. I mean, arguably there's the same number of tape as disk. So from a vendor stability point of view, there's not much difference. And disk drives are starting to airline seat price their disk. In other words, you buy the same thing at different prices depending upon what you're using it. And so I think it's they're in a rock and a hard space. In other words, this isn't a commitment for 20 years of love. It's this is the best thing for the next 5 years, and we'll see if flash kills disk, and maybe I'll move everything to flash.
Yeah, and that's very consistent with the overall financial trend toward shorter amortization schedules in general. Did you have any questions, Joel? No. Okay.
Elaborate a little further on that point. The thing that serves tape really no value in a cloud environment is longevity of media,
That's right.
because it doesn't matter. All it matters is that you don't have to replace it as often as disk, and you make the upgrade of technology when it's the most cost-effective time frame, which is like every 8 years instead of every 3 years if it's HDD. So,
Okay, a little speculation. LTO has taken over the universe. Everybody else is gone except for two things. How are those two things surviving, and why are they surviving, and when are they leaving, and are they leaving?
two things or two companies?
Well, there's two formats that aren't LTO that are still
Oh, I see.
shipping in the universe. One is a proprietary from IBM, and one is a proprietary from Oracle. Excuse me. And I'm wondering how those are continuing to exist, and are they serving a different market from LTO, or is it all headed to Mr. Big Cloud?
I think from my perspective, I'll speak from an IBM perspective, this is what we say publicly, so it's not a big secret confidentiality, is that these two things both have a place and they make sense in concert. In other words, we kind of say internally it's a Toyota Lexus model. You invented that, so you know it, but the idea that I think it'd be very hard to do only LTO or only enterprise, but I think it makes a lot of economic sense to do an enterprise and an LTO where you leverage the investment between the two to serve different parts of the market, and it still makes economic sense.
Let me make a note of that. So you're saying that what Oracle's doing doesn't make any sense?
I'm not saying that at all. Oracle has LTO drives.
But they don't produce them. They don't get any cost benefit.
I don't know that.
True,
I
you
think
don't.
that is confidential information that you're assuming, but I don't know how one would know that unless you work for Oracle.
Let me take
Or
that
you're
to a-
disclosing confidential information you should not disclose. I guess
You'll have a
ask
chance to
yourself
review
that.
this transcript, and you
I'm
can go.
going to take that from one step above that. And some pundits predict that the way the storage marketplace will look will be flash drives and tape, and that the medium-sized disks, let's say
I
mid-range
love
disks,
that vision.
are squeezed out. In fact, Wikibon, the brains over at Wikibon coined the term FLAPE, so flash and tape combined is the storage environment. Pardon me?
Steve Kinston did that, I thought. Anyway,
I
go
saw
on.
it at Wikibon, but so that's you said let's speculate, and that's what a lot of the pundits and would agree that that's what's going to happen into the future.